Police officer stops a suspicious man's car. Upon seeing a little girl in the back seat, he is shocked. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy this gripping journey. The night was eerily quiet. The night was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that gnawed at your nerves and left you questioning whether the world was holding its breath for something ominous. The street lights flickered occasionally, casting orange halos across the cracked pavement of a sleepy neighborhood. Officer Daniel Reed adjusted the rearview mirror of his patrol car, exhaling slowly as he scanned the road ahead. The radio hummed faintly with static and the dashboard clock blinked 11:43 p.m. It was supposed to be another uneventful shift, patrolling empty streets, filing reports on minor disturbances, and maybe pulling over a car or two for speeding. At least, that's what Daniel had told his wife before kissing her on the cheek and leaving home tonight. "Don't fall asleep in the car," she'd teased. Her laughter warm and familiar. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but tonight something felt off. The low rumble of an engine broke through the stillness. Headlights appeared at the far end of the street, moving fast. Too fast. Daniel squinted as the car sped through a stop sign without hesitation. His instincts kicked in immediately, and he flicked on the flashing red and blue lights, pulling out behind the vehicle. The car, an old green sedan with rust lining the wheel wells, slowed and veered onto the shoulder of the road. Daniel parked behind it, adjusted his hat, and reached for his flashlight. He paused for a moment, fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel. Something about this felt strange, but then again, maybe it was just the quiet getting to him. He stepped out, the night air crisp against his skin as his boots crunched softly on the asphalt. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness. Reflecting off the car's dusty rear window, he approached the driver's side cautiously. The window rolled down halfway, and Daniel found himself staring into the face of a man who seemed just a little too put together for this time of night. "Evening, officer," the man said, flashing a polite smile. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Is there a problem?" Daniel studied him for a moment. The man's neatly combed hair and pressed shirt suggested someone heading home from a formal dinner or a business meeting, but the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead told a different story. "You ran a stop sign back there," Daniel said, keeping his tone neutral. "Mind showing me your license and registration?" "Of course." The man reached for the glove compartment without hesitation, retrieving the documents. "Thomas Blake," he added, as if offering the name would smooth things over. Daniel glanced at the papers briefly, then shifted his attention to the back seat. And that's when he saw her. A little girl, no older than 7, sat stiffly in the back. She clutched a ragged teddy bear to her chest, her knuckles pale from the strength of her grip. Blonde curls framed her face, and her blue eyes, wide, unblinking, stared straight ahead. She looked as though she were holding her breath, waiting for something terrifying to happen. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "Who's the girl?" he asked, his voice steady but sharp. Thomas chuckled nervously. "Oh, that's my daughter, Emily. She's just tired. We had a long day visiting family out of town." Emily didn't move. She didn't even blink. Daniel crouched slightly, angling his flashlight to get a better look at her face. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her small body seemed frozen in place, as if she were trying to make herself invisible. The teddy bear trembled slightly in her grasp. "Emily," Daniel said softly, "are you okay?" "Sweetheart?" Her eyes flickered toward him for a fraction of a second, just long enough for him to see the fear swimming in them. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, her fingers tightened around the bear. "She's fine, officer," Thomas interrupted smoothly. "Like I said, just tired. We're only about 20 minutes from home." Daniel's instincts screamed at him to dig deeper, to ask more questions, but he knew the law. Without probable cause, he couldn't hold them here. He forced himself to nod and took a step back. "Well, make sure you stop at the signs from now on," he said, handing the documents back. "Drive safely." Thomas smiled again, that same rehearsed politeness. "Of course, officer. Thank you." As the car pulled away, Daniel stood there, watching the taillights disappear into the night. His gut churned, a cold weight settling in his chest. He couldn't shake the image of Emily's face, the silent plea in her eyes. Something was wrong. He knew it. Without thinking, he pulled out his notepad and scribbled down the car's license plate number. His breath fogged in the cool night air as he made his way back to the patrol car, hands trembling slightly as he grabbed the radio. "This is Officer Reed," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "I need a check on a green sedan, license plate 7BCH426, possible child endangerment." Static crackled on the other end. As he waited for a response, Daniel leaned back in the driver's seat, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. He couldn't prove anything yet, but his instincts were rarely wrong. And tonight, they were screaming at him. Then the radio crackled to life. "Plate registered to a Thomas Blake," the dispatcher confirmed. "Clean record, no warrants." Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Clean or not, something wasn't adding up. He replayed the interaction in his head. The nervous laughter, the sweat on Thomas's brow, the way Emily's fingers trembled. As the patrol car idled on the side of the road, Daniel stared into the empty night. His thoughts raced, torn between protocol and intuition. And then, like a thunderclap, the image of Emily's face flashed in his mind again. Her lips, barely moving, forming two desperate words, "Help me." His heart pounded. He couldn't ignore this. Throwing the car into gear, Daniel made a decision that would change the course of the night, and perhaps save a life. The hum of the engine filled the patrol car, but to Daniel Reed, it was drowned out by the rapid thumping of his heart. His fingers tapped against the steering wheel as he drove aimlessly, replaying the scene over and over in his head. Emily's face haunted him, those wide, glassy eyes filled with fear, and those small lips forming the words, "Help me." He couldn't shake the weight pressing down on his chest. The streets outside were deserted, the only movement coming from leaves tumbling lazily across the pavement under the faint glow of the streetlights. The clock on the dashboard blinked 12:12 a.m., but Daniel felt no fatigue, only adrenaline. His radio remained silent, and the dispatcher's confirmation that Thomas Blake had no prior record played like a broken record in his head. It didn't matter. Criminal records only told part of the story. What he had seen tonight couldn't be explained away by a clean background check. He needed more information. He needed to understand who Thomas Blake really was. Pulling into a nearby gas station, Daniel parked the car and rested his forehead against the steering wheel. For a moment, he closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, trying to calm his racing mind. Was he overreacting? Could it have been nothing more than a tired child in the back seat of her father's car, just as Thomas had said? He wanted to believe that, but the image of Emily gripping that teddy bear, her fingers turning white, wouldn't let him. When he sat up, he grabbed his notepad from the passenger seat and flipped it open to the hastily scrawled license plate number, 7BC. He had written it down instinctively, and now it felt like a lifeline. "Let's see what you've got, Thomas," Daniel muttered to himself as he pulled out his laptop and connected to the police database. His fingers moved quickly over the keys, entering the plate number and cross-referencing it with state records. A profile popped up on the screen. Name: Thomas Blake. Age: 42. Address: 2x12. West Pine Street, Clearview. NY occupation: freelance accountant. Criminal record: none. Daniel's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the basic information. On paper, Thomas seemed like an ordinary guy. A man who paid his taxes, had no history of trouble with the law, and lived in a modest suburban home. But there was something unsettling about the lack of depth in the records, as if Thomas had slipped through the cracks, leaving no trace beyond what was absolutely necessary. He clicked on the tab labeled Family Members. No results. No mention of a wife, no birth certificates for any children, and, most importantly, no record of a daughter named Emily Blake. Daniel's pulse quickened. "Why lie about her being your daughter?" he whispered to himself, the pieces slowly starting to fall into place. He leaned back in the seat, staring at the screen. There were two possibilities. Either Emily wasn't legally his daughter, or she didn't exist in any official capacity, which meant something far more sinister could be at play. His gut told him it was the latter. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was his partner, Detective Jessica Parker, a no-nonsense investigator with a sharp intuition that rivaled his own. "Jess," he answered, trying to steady his voice. "You sound tense," she said. "What's going on?" Daniel hesitated for a moment before recounting everything. The stop at the signal, the trembling girl in the back seat, and the way she silently mouthed, "Help me." Jessica was quiet on the other end for a few seconds, then sighed. "And you let them go?" "I didn't have a choice," Daniel replied, his frustration seeping into his tone. "I had nothing solid to hold him on. But Jess, something's wrong, I can feel it." "Your instincts are usually spot on," she admitted. "What do you want to do?" "I'm sitting on his profile right now. No criminal record, no family listed, and no proof that Emily is actually his daughter." "Sounds like we've got a ghost on our hands," Jessica murmured. "Okay, send me what you have. I'll see if I can find any missing persons reports that match the description of the girl." Daniel nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Thanks. And Jess, this feels different. I'm not sure what we're dealing with, but I don't think it's going to be simple." "It never is," she replied. "Stay put. I'll call you back once I find something." The line went dead, and Daniel sat in the dim glow of the patrol car, his fingers drumming restlessly on the laptop. He couldn't just sit here, not when Emily was out there, possibly in danger. He pulled up traffic camera feeds from the intersection where he had stopped Thomas earlier. After scrubbing through several minutes of footage, he found it, the moment the green sedan rolled through the stop sign. He fast-forwarded to the point where Thomas pulled over and Daniel approached the car. The resolution was grainy, but he could make out the shadow of Emily's small frame in the back seat. He paused the video and zoomed in on her face. Even in the blurry image, her fear was unmistakable. Her lips were slightly parted, mid-movement, as if she were speaking. Daniel rewound the footage and played it again. This time he slowed it down, watching closely as her lips moved. He could almost hear her whispering the words. "Help me." A chill ran down his spine and he swallowed hard. This wasn't just his imagination. The radio crackled and Daniel jumped, quickly reaching for the receiver. "Dispatch to Officer Reed," a voice said. "We have an alert on a missing child reported earlier this week. 7-year-old Emily Cooper. Last seen at a park in Fairview. Description matches the girl you reported." Daniel's blood ran cold. "Fairview?" "Affirmative," the dispatcher confirmed. "She's been missing for 5 days. Local authorities issued an Amber Alert, but there haven't been any leads until now." Daniel's mind raced. Fairview was less than 2 hours from here. If Thomas had taken Emily, there was no telling where he was headed or what he planned to do. He grabbed the radio again. "Get me Detective Parker, I need backup, now." "Copy that," the dispatcher replied. Daniel's hands trembled as he started the car and sped down the empty street. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on his chest. He had seen missing person cases before, too many if he were being honest. But this one was personal now. Emily's face was burned into his memory, and he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. As he made a sharp turn onto the main road, headlights illuminated the darkness ahead, and Daniel pressed down on the accelerator. He was going to find her, no matter what it took, and if Thomas Blake was involved, he would regret ever running that stop sign tonight. The road stretched endlessly before him, bathed in the dim orange glow of streetlights that flickered with every gust of wind. The night air seeped through the cracked window of the patrol car, but Daniel Reed didn't feel the chill. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched as he sped toward the station where Jessica Parker was waiting. He couldn't shake the voice of the dispatcher echoing in his head. Emily Cooper, missing for 5 days. She had a name now, a real, tangible identity, and suddenly, it wasn't just about instinct anymore. It was about saving her before it was too late. The station loomed ahead, its large brick exterior illuminated by the glow of the overhead lamps in the parking lot. Daniel parked hastily, and didn't bother locking the car as he made his way inside. The familiar hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above, and the smell of stale coffee greeted him. The station was quieter than usual, with only a few officers working the night shift. He found Jessica in one of the conference rooms, already hunched over a laptop with a folder spread out in front of her. She looked up as he entered, her brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and the same determined expression he'd seen countless times on her face. "I just got off the phone with Fairview PD," she said, skipping the pleasantries. They confirmed everything. Emily Cooper was last seen at a playground near her home. Witnesses said she was playing on the swings when a man approached her. No one saw her leave but the description of the man they're looking for. It matches Thomas Blake. Daniel sank into the chair across from her, running a hand over his face. And they didn't have any leads until now? Jessica shook her head. Nothing solid. They thought maybe she wandered off on her own, but now… She trailed off, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the keyboard. "I pulled some additional records on Blake. It's thin. But take a look at this." She turned the laptop toward him. On the screen was a list of reports filed in towns surrounding Clearview over the past 10 years. Most were marked as unsubstantiated or closed without charges, but the pattern was hard to ignore. Multiple instances of suspicious behavior near schools, parks, and playgrounds. In some cases, children had reported a man trying to lure them into a car with promises of candy or toys. None of the cases had led to an arrest, but the physical descriptions of the suspect were eerily similar. A man in his 40s, clean-cut, well-dressed. "Blake's been flying under the radar for years," Jessica said, leaning back in her chair. "He's careful. He moves around just enough to avoid raising too many red flags. But this time, he slipped up." Daniel stared at the screen, his mind racing. "Because of the stop sign," he murmured. Jessica nodded. "If you hadn't stopped him tonight, we wouldn't even know he had Emily." The weight of her words settled heavily on Daniel's shoulders. He'd been beating himself up for letting them go, but now he realized that moment had been a turning point. If he hadn't been there, Emily might have disappeared forever. "What else do we know about him?" Daniel asked, leaning forward. Jessica flipped through the folder on the table and pulled out a printout of Thomas Blake's background check. "He's originally from a small town upstate. No immediate family that we know of. He works as a freelance accountant, which means he can move around without raising too many questions. But here's the interesting part." She tapped the paper. "His last known address before Clearview was in Fairview, where Emily went missing." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "He's familiar with the area." "Exactly. I think he took her somewhere he knows. Somewhere remote." Daniel exhaled sharply, his mind already piecing together possible locations. "There's got to be a connection. Maybe an old house, a family cabin." Jessica's phone buzzed, and she quickly answered it. Daniel watched as her expression shifted, her eyes narrowing with concentration. "Got it," she said before hanging up. "That was Fairview PD," she explained. "They found Blake's old landlord. The guy mentioned that Blake used to spend weekends at a cabin near Lake Arbor. It's secluded, hard to reach, and hasn't been maintained in years. But get this, the landlord thinks Blake still has a set of keys." Daniel's heart pounded. "That's got to be it." Jessica nodded, already gathering her things. "I'll alert the local units to meet us there. But if this is where he's hiding…" "We can't wait." Daniel stood, the adrenaline coursing through him like a second heartbeat. "Let's go." The drive to Lake Arbor was tense and silent, the only sound coming from the hum of the tires against the pavement and the occasional crackle of the police radio. The night seemed darker now, the trees lining the road casting long shadows that danced in the headlights. Jessica was focused on the GPS, guiding them toward the dirt road that would lead to the cabin. "Turn left up ahead," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "It should be about 2 miles from here." Daniel made the turn, the patrol car bouncing slightly as the tires hit the uneven dirt path. The forest grew denser around them, the branches overhead forming a canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight. His grip on the wheel tightened as he navigated the narrow road, his mind racing with thoughts of what they might find at the end of it. When the cabin finally came into view, Daniel slowed the car to a crawl. The structure was barely visible through the trees. Its wooden exterior weathered and covered in ivy. A single light glowed faintly through one of the windows, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Jessica reached for her radio. "This is Detective Parker. We've arrived at the location, requesting backup." "Copy that," the dispatcher replied. "Units are en route." Daniel killed the engine, and the silence that followed was deafening. He and Jessica exchanged a look before stepping out of the car. Their boots crunched softly against the gravel as they approached the cabin, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Blake's car isn't here," Jessica whispered. "He could have parked it farther down the road to avoid detection," Daniel replied. "Stay sharp." They reached the porch and Daniel tested the door handle. It was locked. He pressed his ear against the wood, listening for any sounds inside. Then, faintly, he heard it, a muffled whimper. Jessica's eyes widened and Daniel didn't hesitate. He stepped back and kicked the door in, the wood splintering as it swung open. The smell of damp wood and mildew hit him first, followed by the sound of footsteps scrambling away. "Police!" Daniel shouted, his flashlight sweeping across the room. "Thomas Blake, show yourself!" But it wasn't Thomas who emerged from the shadows. It was Emily. She stood trembling near the back of the room. Her teddy bear clutched tightly to her chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks and her small body shook with silent sobs. Daniel's heart broke at the sight of her. He lowered his flashlight and took a cautious step forward. "Emily," he said gently, "it's okay. We're here to help." She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting someone to grab her. "Where's Thomas?" Jessica whispered, scanning the cabin. Before Daniel could respond, the sound of tires screeching on the dirt road outside pierced the night. He spun around, his gut telling him exactly what was happening. "He's running," Daniel said, his voice laced with determination. "I'm going after him." Jessica nodded. "I'll stay with Emily." Without another word, Daniel bolted out the door, his breath fogging in the cold night air. The hunt was on. The night air cut sharply against Daniel's face as he sprinted down the dirt path, his boots pounding against the uneven ground. The only sound louder than his footsteps was the pounding of his heart, each beat echoing with urgency. He couldn't afford to lose Thomas Blake. Not now. The glow of taillights flickered through the trees ahead, disappearing and reappearing as the car bounced along the rough path. Thomas was making his getaway, but the road was narrow and winding. If Daniel could catch up before Blake reached the main highway, there was still a chance. He pressed the button on his radio, his breath coming in short gasps. "Suspect is fleeing west on the dirt road near Lake Arbor, requesting immediate backup." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Copy, Officer Reed. Units are en route." Daniel's patrol car was parked too far back, and by the time he reached it, Thomas would already be long gone. But he couldn't stop. He had no choice but to keep running. The woods blurred around him as he pushed himself harder, his legs burning with every stride. The sound of screeching tires suddenly cut through the night, followed by the unmistakable crunch of metal against wood. Daniel's pulse quickened. He slowed just enough to see the faint glow of headlights flickering through the trees. Thomas's car had crashed. He veered off the path, dodging branches and roots as he made his way toward the wreckage. The scent of burning rubber filled the air, and the car sat at an awkward angle against a tree. Its front end crumpled. Steam hissed from under the hood, and the driver's side door was open. Daniel pulled his flashlight from his belt and scanned the area, the beam cutting through the darkness. The driver's seat was empty. "He's on foot," Daniel muttered, raising the radio to his lips again. "Suspect has abandoned the vehicle, heading west into the woods." He moved cautiously, his flashlight illuminating the dense forest floor. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig beneath his boots. Thomas couldn't have gotten far, not after a crash like that. Daniel's eyes darted from shadow to shadow, his senses on high alert, his breath fogged in the cold air as he advanced deeper into the woods. The trees towered above him, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Every shadow seemed to shift and breathe, making it impossible to tell where Thomas might be hiding. Then he heard it, a faint rustling to his right. Daniel stopped in his tracks, his flashlight snapping toward the sound. His fingers tightened around the handle as he moved slowly in that direction, careful not to make noise. "Blake!" he called out, his voice cutting through the night. "It's over." There's nowhere left to run. For a moment there was only silence. Then, suddenly, a figure burst from behind a tree, sprinting through the underbrush. Daniel bolted after him, dodging low-hanging branches and leaping over fallen logs. The gap between them was closing fast. He could hear Thomas's labored breathing just ahead. Could see the desperate way the man's feet slipped on the damp ground. "You're done, Blake," Daniel shouted, his voice filled with determination. "Stop running." Thomas didn't listen. Instead, he veered sharply to the left, hoping to lose Daniel in the maze of trees. But Daniel anticipated the move, cutting him off and lunging forward. His hand caught the back of Thomas's jacket, and the two of them tumbled to the ground, rolling over dirt and leaves. Thomas fought back wildly, kicking and thrashing as he tried to free himself. His elbow connected with Daniel's ribs, sending a jolt of pain through his side. But Daniel didn't let go. He gritted his teeth and wrestled Thomas onto his stomach, pinning him down with his knee. "Get off me," Thomas snarled, his voice strained with panic. "Not a chance," Daniel growled, grabbing his handcuffs. "You're under arrest." The cold metal clicked into place around Thomas's wrists. And Daniel exhaled sharply, the weight of the chase finally catching up to him. His chest heaved as he sat back on his knees, keeping one hand firmly on Thomas's shoulder. "You don't know what you're doing," Thomas spat, twisting his head to glare at Daniel. "You're making a mistake." Daniel ignored him and reached for his radio. "Suspect in custody. Need transport to the station." The dispatcher acknowledged the call, and Daniel allowed himself a moment to catch his breath. The forest around them was eerily quiet, the only sound coming from the distant hum of approaching sirens. Thomas chuckled darkly, his breath ragged. "You think you've won, don't you?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I don't need to win, Blake. I just need to make sure that little girl is safe." At the mention of Emily, Thomas's expression twisted into something between anger and amusement. "You don't get it," he said. "You're too late. You can arrest me. Lock me up. Do whatever you want. But you'll never find the others." Daniel's stomach churned. "What others?" Thomas smirked but didn't answer. Daniel yanked him up to his feet and shoved him forward, guiding him back toward the road where the patrol cars would be arriving any minute. His mind raced with questions. What did Thomas mean by the others? Was Emily part of something bigger than a simple abduction? By the time they reached the edge of the woods, the red and blue lights of the backup units were flashing brightly. Two officers rushed over to take custody of Thomas, who didn't resist, as they loaded him into the back of a patrol car. Daniel watched as the car drove away, his breath still coming in short gasps. The weight of the night pressed down on him, but he couldn't afford to stop now. He turned back toward the cabin, where Jessica would be waiting with Emily. His job wasn't over, not even close. Back at the cabin, Jessica was sitting on the floor with Emily, gently brushing the girl's hair back from her tear-streaked face. The teddy bear was still clutched tightly in her arms, and her small body trembled with every breath. When Daniel entered, Emily's eyes darted toward him, wide and cautious. But when she recognized him, her expression softened slightly. "You're safe now," Daniel said softly, crouching down to her level. "We're going to take you home." Emily didn't respond, but she leaned into Jessica's side, seeking comfort. "We need to get her checked out at the hospital," Jessica said quietly. "Make sure she's okay physically." Daniel nodded. "And after that, we're finding out exactly what Thomas meant by the others." Jessica's gaze met his, and he could see the same determination burning in her eyes. Whatever this was, it wasn't over yet. Emily let out a small, shaky breath, and Daniel's heart ached at the sight of her. He knew the road ahead would be long, but for now, she was safe. And that was all that mattered. For now. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above them as Daniel Reed leaned against the wall of the hospital waiting room, arms folded tightly across his chest. He couldn't sit down, not when his thoughts were running wild. His gaze darted to the clock on the wall, 4:12 a.m. The night had slipped away and dawn was creeping closer, but Daniel felt no relief. Jessica Parker sat across from him, her legs crossed and her eyes glued to the phone in her hand as she scrolled through police reports. She hadn't said much since they arrived, but Daniel could see the gears turning in her mind. The way her brow furrowed with concentration. Behind the double doors leading to the examination rooms, Emily Cooper was being checked by a pediatric doctor. Daniel hadn't been allowed to stay with her, but he had watched as the nurses led her inside, still clinging to her teddy bear like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Anything yet?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. Jessica sighed and shook her head. "I've been looking into Thomas Blake's financial records. The guy's smart. No obvious paper trail, no suspicious bank activity, no large withdrawals that could point to payments for something illegal." She paused, scrolling faster. "But there's one thing, he made regular payments to a storage unit outside of Fairview." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "A storage unit?" Jessica nodded. "It's under a different name, but the timing matches when he was living there. I called Fairview PD, they're sending someone to check it out." Daniel exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. "What about what he said in the woods about the others?" "That's what's bothering me," Jessica admitted. "Blake wasn't panicking when he said it. He was taunting you, like he knows something we don't." Daniel rubbed a hand over his face. He wasn't lying. I could see it in his eyes. Before Jessica could respond, the double doors swung open and a nurse stepped into the waiting room. "Officer Reed," Daniel pushed off the wall. "How is she?" The nurse offered a small smile. "Physically, she's okay. No injuries aside from a few scrapes and bruises. But she's shaken. The doctor recommended a child psychologist to help her process the trauma." Daniel's shoulders sagged with relief. But the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on him. "Can I see her?" The nurse nodded and led him down the corridor to a small examination room. When Daniel stepped inside, he saw Emily sitting on the bed, her legs swinging slightly as she traced her fingers along the stitches of her teddy bear. Her blonde curls were a mess and her eyes, though less fearful than before, still carried a distant, haunted look. "Hi, Emily," Daniel said softly, taking a seat in the chair next to her. She looked up at him, her small fingers tightening around the bear. "You're safe now," he reassured her. "No one's going to hurt you." Emily didn't respond at first. Her gaze shifted toward the door, as if she expected Thomas Blake to walk in at any moment. Then her voice, small and barely audible, broke the silence. "Is he gone?" Daniel's heart twisted at the fear in her voice. "Yes, he's gone, and he's not coming back." Her lips trembled and she pressed her face against the bear's worn fur. Daniel wanted to reach out and comfort her, but he knew better than to push. Instead, he waited, giving her the space to speak when she was ready. After a moment, she whispered, "He said I couldn't go home." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Why did he say that, Emily?" She hesitated, her small hands clutching the bear like it was a lifeline. "Because of Mr. Kane." Daniel's blood ran cold. "Who's Mr. Kane?" Emily's eyes flickered toward him, wide and full of fear. "He's the one who takes us away." The room fell deathly silent. Daniel felt the weight of her words hit him like a freight train. He swallowed hard and kept his voice gentle. "Emily, how do you know about Mr. Kane?" "He talks about him," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Thomas said Mr. Kane picks the kids and then they have to go away." Daniel's mind raced. "Did he tell you where Mr. Kane is?" Emily shook her head quickly, tears brimming in her eyes. "He just said it's far away, and that if I was good, I wouldn't have to stay there long." Daniel clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. He forced himself to stay calm for Emily's sake. "You're safe now, okay? No one is going to take you anywhere." Her bottom lip quivered and she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Promise?" "I promise," Daniel said firmly. We're going to make sure you go home to your family." A knock on the door interrupted them, and Jessica stepped inside, her expression serious. "Daniel, we need to talk." He gave Emily a reassuring smile. "I'll be right back, okay?" She nodded and hugged the teddy bear tighter as he stood and followed Jessica into the hallway. "What is it?" he asked. Jessica lowered her voice. "Fairview PD checked out the storage unit. They found something." Daniel's stomach tightened. "What did they find?" Jessica pulled out her phone and showed him a photo taken at the scene. His breath caught in his throat. Inside the storage unit were stacks of boxes, each labeled with a name and date. There were photos of children, medical records, and even forged birth certificates. But the most chilling part was the handwritten ledger lying open on the table, with a list of names followed by numbers. Amounts of money, Daniel realized. Blake was part of a larger operation, Jessica said grimly. "This isn't just a kidnapping case, it's trafficking." Daniel stared at the photo, the anger in his chest turning into a full-blown inferno. "We need to find Mr. Kane." Jessica nodded. "I've already put out a request to cross-check every name in that ledger with missing persons reports. But if Blake was telling the truth, we're up against something big." Daniel's mind flashed back to the fear in Emily's eyes when she mentioned Mr. Kane. "If we don't stop this now, more kids are going to disappear. And if Mr. Kane is as careful as Blake was," Jessica added, "we might not get a second chance." Daniel didn't need to be told twice. He knew what was at stake. As they walked back toward the waiting room, a thought crept into his mind, a thought he couldn't ignore. Blake had been careful, methodical, and elusive. But he had made one mistake tonight. He had underestimated Daniel's instincts, and Daniel wasn't about to let Mr. Kane slip through the cracks. The early morning sun crept over the horizon, casting a soft orange glow over the city. But the warmth of dawn did nothing to ease the cold tension gripping Daniel Reed's chest. He stood next to Jessica Parker outside the precinct, sipping a cup of coffee that had long since gone lukewarm. They hadn't slept. And judging by the hard set of Jessica's jaw, she didn't plan on resting anytime soon either. "I contacted the state task force," Jessica said, scrolling through her phone. "They're mobilizing a team to analyze everything we pulled from Blake's storage unit. The ledger, the photos, the birth certificates. It's enough to warrant a major investigation." Daniel nodded, barely listening. His mind was stuck on Emily's words from earlier. Mr. Kane is the one who takes us away. Who was this man? And how had he managed to operate in the shadows for so long without getting caught? "What if we're too late?" Daniel muttered, the thought slipping out before he could stop it. Jessica looked up, her gaze steady. "We're not. We found Emily in time. We'll find the others." But her words, meant to reassure, only added to the weight pressing down on him. "I can't stop thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't pulled him over last night." "You did," Jessica reminded him firmly. "That's what matters." Daniel rubbed his eyes, exhaustion creeping in despite the adrenaline that had kept him going all night. "We need to get Blake talking. He knows where Mr. Kane is." Jessica hesitated, then nodded. "Let's go." The interrogation room was cold, sterile, and silent. Thomas Blake sat on the metal chair, his hands cuffed to the table in front of him. His once polished appearance was disheveled now. His neatly combed hair was messy, and his shirt was wrinkled and stained from the chase through the woods. But his eyes, calm and calculating, hadn't lost their edge. Daniel and Jessica entered the room, their footsteps echoing off the tile floor. Jessica leaned against the wall while Daniel pulled out a chair across from Blake and sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was filled with the heavy silence of a predator caught in a trap, but refusing to panic. "You've been busy," Daniel said finally, sliding a photo of the storage unit across the table. "We found your little collection, the forged documents, the photos of the kids. You've been doing this for years, haven't you?" Blake's lips curled into a small, smug smile. "You seem awfully sure of yourself, Officer Reed." Daniel ignored the jab. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell us who Mr. Kane is and where we can find him. And if you cooperate, Maybe we'll talk to the DA about reducing your sentence." Blake leaned back in his chair, his gaze never wavering. "You think you're the first person to try to cut a deal with me? I've been in rooms like this before, officer, and I've walked out of them every time." Daniel's fingers twitched, his patience wearing thin. He thought of Emily, of her small, trembling frame and the terror in her eyes when she mentioned Mr. Kane. "You're not walking out of this one," he said through clenched teeth. Blake chuckled softly. "You're wasting your time. Even if I wanted to help you, you'd never catch him. Kane doesn't leave loose ends. That's why he's still out there, and why you'll never find him." Jessica, who had been silently observing, pushed off the wall and stepped forward. "You're not as smart as you think you are. Thomas, if you were, we wouldn't be here right now. You made a mistake." Blake's smile faltered ever so slightly. Jessica leaned down, her voice low but sharp. "You think Kane's going to protect you? Let me tell you what's going to happen. The minute he finds out you've been arrested, you'll be a liability. Do you really think he's going to let you sit in prison and risk you talking to us?" Blake's eyes flickered with something. Fear, perhaps, but it was gone just as quickly. He straightened his posture, regaining his composure. "Nice try, detective, but I'm not scared of Kane." "You should be," Daniel said, leaning in. "Because if you don't give us what we need, you're not just going down for Emily's kidnapping. You'll take the fall for every kid on that list, and the rest of your life will be spent in a maximum security prison. No deals, no leniency, nothing." Blake's jaw tightened. For the first time, his confidence seemed to crack. Jessica seized the moment. "Or you could help yourself. Give us Kane, and we'll make sure you're protected. Witness protection, new identity, the whole package." Blake hesitated, his eyes darting between them. Daniel could see the wheels turning in his head, weighing the risks. He leaned forward slightly, willing Blake to take the bait. Finally, Blake exhaled and slumped back in his chair. "Kane's not someone you can just walk up to and arrest. He's careful. He uses middlemen, and none of us know his real name. But..." He paused as if debating whether to continue. "But what?" Daniel pressed. "There's a meeting," Blake said reluctantly. "It was set up before you caught me. Kane's sending someone to pick up another kid. Tomorrow night." Daniel's breath hitched. "Where?" "An abandoned warehouse outside of Clearview. It's where we do most of the exchanges," Blake admitted. "Kane won't be there, but his guy will. And if you're lucky, maybe you can get him to talk." Daniel shot a glance at Jessica, who nodded. This was their chance. "You're making the right choice," Jessica said, her voice steady. "We'll keep you safe." Blake smirked faintly, but the fear hadn't completely left his eyes. "I hope so. Because if you don't, Kane will make sure I disappear." Back in the hallway, Daniel leaned against the wall, exhaling sharply. His hands trembled slightly, and he balled them into fists to steady himself. Jessica stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "This is it," Daniel said. "We finally have a lead." Jessica nodded, but her voice was cautious. "It's not over yet. Blake could be setting us up. We need to be ready for anything." Daniel didn't need the reminder. He knew the risks, but the thought of catching even a piece of this operation was enough to push him forward. "We'll be ready," he said firmly. "We have to be." As they made their way back to the station to prepare, Daniel couldn't shake the thought that had been gnawing at him all night. What if they were walking into a trap? Either way, they didn't have a choice. Tomorrow night, everything would change. The abandoned warehouse stood like a forgotten relic on the outskirts of Clearview, its once white walls now stained with rust and grime. The windows were shattered, leaving jagged shards of glass clinging to the frames like teeth. The air smelled of oil and mildew, and the faint hum of nearby power lines buzzed in the background, adding to the eerie stillness of the night. Daniel Reed adjusted the bulletproof vest strapped tightly to his chest and scanned the perimeter with sharp, calculating eyes. The warehouse was dark except for a single overhead light casting a dim, yellowish glow near the entrance. It flickered occasionally, as if threatening to die at any moment. Jessica Parker stood beside him, her hand resting on the radio clipped to her shoulder. She was dressed in tactical gear, her hair tucked neatly under a black cap, and her eyes were focused and alert. "Backup's stationed half a mile out," she said quietly. "If anything goes south, they'll be here in minutes." Daniel nodded, but his jaw remained tight. His mind raced with the possibilities. Would the pickup go as planned? Or was this a setup? Thomas Blake had given them the location reluctantly, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that Blake was holding something back. "You sure about this?" Jessica asked, sensing his unease. "No," Daniel admitted, exhaling slowly. "But it's the only lead we've got." She nodded, her gaze shifting toward the warehouse. "Then let's make it count." They crept silently through the overgrown weeds surrounding the building, their footsteps muffled by the soft dirt. The tension in the air was suffocating, each breath Daniel took feeling heavier than the last. His fingers brushed against the grip of his gun, a familiar reassurance in an unpredictable situation. As they approached the side entrance, Daniel signaled for Jessica to take cover behind a stack of rusted barrels. He crouched low and peeked through a cracked window, his eyes scanning the interior. The warehouse was mostly empty, save for a few broken-down crates and stacks of wooden pallets. In the center of the room stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in dark clothing. His face was partially obscured by the shadow cast by his baseball cap. He checked his phone every few seconds, pacing nervously. "That's our guy," Daniel whispered into the radio. "Doesn't look like he's alone," Jessica replied, her voice crackling softly through his earpiece. "I see movement near the back. Someone else is here." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Stay sharp. If Kane's middleman brought backup, we'll need to act fast." The man in the center of the room suddenly stopped pacing and glanced toward the entrance as if waiting for something, or someone. A car engine rumbled faintly in the distance, growing louder as it neared the warehouse. Daniel tensed, his eyes narrowing as headlights cut through the darkness and illuminated the dirt path leading to the entrance. A black SUV came to a stop just outside the building, and the driver's door opened. A second man, dressed similarly in dark clothing, stepped out and opened the rear passenger door. Daniel's breath hitched when he saw her. A young girl, no older than 8, was pulled roughly from the back seat. Her blonde hair was tangled, and she clutched a small backpack against her chest. She didn't cry, but her wide, frightened eyes spoke volumes. "Jessica," Daniel said, his voice tight. "They've got another kid." Jessica's voice came through his earpiece, steady and calm. "We're not letting them leave with her. What's the plan?" Daniel's mind worked quickly. They couldn't risk a direct confrontation without knowing how many people were inside. If the middleman was armed, and he probably was, the situation could turn deadly in seconds. "We wait until they're inside," Daniel replied. "Once they close the doors, we move." The heavy metal door groaned as it swung open, and the man holding the girl led her inside. The SUV driver followed close behind, leaving the vehicle idling just outside the entrance. As soon as the door shut, Daniel signaled to Jessica, "Go." They moved swiftly, keeping low as they approached the side entrance. Daniel eased the door open just enough to slip inside, the sound masked by the hum of the generator near the back of the building. Jessica followed, her footsteps silent and precise. Inside, the warehouse felt even larger, the high ceilings amplifying every sound. The girl was seated on the ground near a stack of crates, her knees pulled to her chest. The man who had brought her inside was speaking quietly to the middleman, their conversation too hushed for Daniel to hear. He crept closer, staying hidden behind the crates, until he could make out snippets of their exchange. "Kane wants her delivered tonight," the middleman said. His voice was low, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "No mistakes this time," the other man nodded. "We'll be in and out. What about Blake?" "Forget him," the middleman replied. "He's already a dead man." Daniel's fists clenched at the mention of Blake. He had been right. Kane wasn't going to protect him. Blake had been nothing more than a pawn, and now that he was caught, he was expendable. Jessica's voice crackled softly in his earpiece. "We've got enough to move. Ready?" "Ready," Daniel whispered back. He counted to 3, then sprang from his hiding spot, gun drawn. "Police, don't move!" The middleman's eyes widened in shock, but he recovered quickly, reaching for something inside his jacket. Daniel didn't hesitate. He fired a warning shot into the ground, the sound echoing like thunder through the warehouse. "Hands where I can see them," Daniel barked. Jessica emerged from the shadows, her gun trained on the man holding the girl. "Step away from her." The man hesitated, his eyes darting toward the exit. But he quickly realized he was cornered. He raised his hands slowly and backed away from the girl, who whimpered softly but didn't move. "Get on the ground," Jessica ordered. Both men complied, lying face down on the cold concrete as Daniel and Jessica cuffed them. The tension in Daniel's chest eased slightly, but the adrenaline still coursed through him. He turned to the girl, who was trembling violently, her eyes locked on him. "It's okay," Daniel said gently, lowering his gun and kneeling beside her. "You're safe now." She sniffled, tears streaming down her face as she clung to her backpack. "Are you taking me home?" Daniel's throat tightened. "Yes, we are." Behind him, Jessica secured the suspects and called for backup. The sounds of approaching sirens filled the night, but all Daniel could focus on was the girl in front of him, the latest victim of a nightmare they were just beginning to uncover. He knew this wasn't the end. Mr. Kane was still out there. And until they caught him, no child would truly be safe. The sun had barely risen when Daniel Reed and Jessica Parker pulled into the police station. The air outside was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of rain from the storm that had rolled through the night before. But inside the precinct, the tension was suffocating. Daniel ran a hand through his messy hair and downed the last of his cold coffee as they made their way to the interrogation rooms. The two men they had arrested at the warehouse were being held separately, and it was time to make them talk. "Which one do you want first?" Jessica asked, glancing toward the room where the middleman was waiting. Daniel didn't hesitate. "The one who knows Kane." Jessica nodded. "Let's see if he's willing to share his secrets." The middleman sat slumped in the metal chair, his hands cuffed in front of him and his cap removed, revealing thinning hair and a furrowed brow. His eyes followed Daniel and Jessica as they entered the room, but he didn't say a word. He exuded the quiet arrogance of someone who thought he had nothing to lose. Daniel dropped a thick folder onto the table with a thud, making the man flinch slightly. "Let's cut the small talk," Daniel said, his voice low but firm. "We know who you are, and we know what you've been doing." He opened the folder, revealing photos of the children listed in Blake's ledger, including Emily and the girl they had rescued last night. "This is what you've been delivering, isn't it? Children, taken from their families and handed over to Kane." The man's jaw tightened, but he kept his gaze fixed on the table. Jessica crossed her arms and leaned against the wall, her eyes never leaving him. "You think staying quiet is going to protect you?" she asked. "Kane doesn't care about you. He'll throw you under the bus just like he did with Blake." The man let out a bitter chuckle. "You think you're scaring me? I've been in this game longer than you've been wearing a badge." Daniel slammed his hands on the table, the sound reverberating through the room. "Then you know how this works. The first one to talk gets the deal. The other one, he's looking at life without parole." The man leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "And what exactly are you offering?" Jessica stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting. "Protection, witness relocation, a new identity. But that offer expires the minute we leave this room." For a moment, the man seemed to consider his options. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the metal cuffs, and Daniel could see the gears turning in his head. He was weighing the risks, whether Kane's wrath was worse than the life sentence waiting for him if he stayed silent. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You want Kane? Fine. But I'm not giving you his real name because I don't know it." "No one does." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Then give us something we can use." The man exhaled slowly, as if letting go of a weight he'd been carrying. "Kane doesn't meet directly with people like me or Blake. He stays hidden, communicates through intermediaries. But there's a man who handles his finances. Goes by the name Vincent Langley. He's the one who makes sure the money moves cleanly, and he's been working with Kane for years. Jessica exchanged a glance with Daniel. They had finally found a crack in Kane's operation. "Where can we find Langley?" Daniel asked. The man shrugged. "He's got a few properties, but the one you want is his vacation home in Charleston. It's off the books private. If Kane's hiding anything, Langley will know about it." Jessica stepped closer, her voice lowering to a near whisper. "If you're lying, you know what happens, right?" "I'm not lying," the man replied, his tone equally serious. "Kane doesn't leave a trail, but Langley does. If you can get him to talk, you might actually have a shot." Daniel stood, closing the folder and tucking it under his arm. "We'll see if you're right." As they left the room, Jessica let out a breath she'd been holding. "Vincent Langley," she said, testing the name. "Let's hope he's the weak link we need." Daniel's mind was already racing. If he's been laundering money for Kane, he knows where the bodies are buried. We just have to dig deep enough to find them. It didn't take long to track down Langley's vacation property in Charleston, a secluded beachfront mansion surrounded by tall hedges and gated entryways. The man had done well for himself, using his financial expertise to hide the dirty money flowing through Kane's network. By the time they arrived, the sun was high in the sky, casting a harsh glare over the pristine white exterior of the house. Jessica parked the car just down the street, and they approached the gate on foot, their badges tucked out of sight. "Think he's home?" Jessica asked, scanning the area for signs of movement. "We're about to find out," Daniel replied, pressing the intercom button. A few moments later, a voice crackled through the speaker. "Yes? Vincent Langley?" Daniel asked. "Who's asking?" Daniel pulled out his badge and held it up to the security camera. "Detective Reed, Clearview PD. We need to talk." There was a pause, then the gate buzzed and slowly swung open. Jessica shot Daniel a cautious glance, and they made their way up the long driveway. The mansion loomed before them, its large glass windows reflecting the sunlight like mirrors. Langley met them at the front door, dressed casually in linen pants and a button-up shirt. His hair was neatly combed, and he exuded the calm confidence of a man who had spent his life in control of everything around him. "Detectives," he said, gesturing for them to enter. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Daniel didn't waste time. "We're investigating a human trafficking operation, and your name came up." Langley's smile didn't falter, but Daniel noticed the way his fingers twitched slightly. "I think you must be mistaken." Jessica stepped forward. "We've got enough evidence to make this official, Langley. Or you can cooperate and tell us what you know about Kane's operation." Langley chuckled softly. "You think I'd betray Kane? I'd be dead by the end of the week." Daniel's eyes hardened. "If you don't, we'll make sure you spend the rest of your life in a cell. Kane won't be able to protect you there." For the first time, Langley's composure cracked. He exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand who you're dealing with. Kane isn't just some criminal mastermind. He has connections, powerful ones. If you go after him and fail, he'll bury you." "We're not going to fail," Jessica said firmly. "Tell us what we need to know." Langley hesitated, then gestured toward the living room. "There's a safe behind the bookshelf. Everything you need is in there: bank statements, offshore accounts, transaction histories. But if you're serious about taking him down, you'll need more than just paper trails." Daniel followed him into the room and watched as Langley moved a stack of books aside, revealing a hidden keypad. After entering the code, the safe clicked open, and Langley pulled out a thick folder. "Good luck," Langley said, handing it over. "You're going to need it." As Daniel flipped through the documents, his breath caught. The names, the payments, the locations. This was it. Jessica leaned over his shoulder, her eyes widening as she scanned the pages. "We've got him." Daniel's pulse raced. Mr. Kane had spent years hiding behind layers of secrecy, but now they had a map leading straight to him. The hunt was on. The plane touched down smoothly at the small regional airport outside of Savannah, Georgia. The hum of the engines faded as the wheels met the tarmac, but Daniel Reed's mind remained anything but calm. He sat near the window, his eyes fixed on the horizon as the morning fog slowly lifted. Somewhere out there was Mr. Kane, no longer a ghost hidden in the shadows, but a man whose empire had just been given a deadly blow. Jessica Parker, seated beside him, stretched her arms and gave him a sidelong glance. "You've been quiet the whole flight." "I'm thinking," Daniel replied, still staring out the window. She smirked. "You do that a lot. What's on your mind?" He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Langley's documents give us everything we need. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, properties tied to shell companies, all of them lead back to Kane's network. But there's one address that stands out." Jessica nodded, pulling the thick folder from her bag and flipping it open. The warehouse compound just outside the city. Multiple transactions linked to it. And Langley said it's where Kane's operations are centralized. "Then that's where we go," Daniel said. Jessica leaned back in her seat, her eyes scanning the passengers as they gathered their belongings. "This is the closest we've ever been to him, but if we're wrong, if he's not there, he'll disappear again." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We're not wrong." The warehouse compound was located on the outskirts of town, tucked behind a cluster of abandoned factories and overgrown lots. The main building was large and rectangular, its gray exterior covered in graffiti and rust. To anyone driving past, it looked like just another forgotten piece of industrial decay. But Daniel knew better. According to Langley's documents, this was the heart of Kane's operation, a place where children were held before being transported to their final destinations. It was a place built on secrecy and pain, and today, it was going to come crashing down. Jessica parked their unmarked car a block away, and they both got out, keeping low as they made their way toward the back of the compound. The morning air was crisp, and the distant sound of traffic echoed faintly through the empty streets. "SWAT's 5 minutes out," Jessica whispered, checking her radio. "We hold position until they arrive." Daniel peered through the fence, his eyes narrowing as he took in the layout of the compound. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, their movement slow and relaxed, as if they weren't expecting trouble. A delivery truck was parked near the loading dock, its engine idling as a worker loaded crates into the back. Daniel's pulse quickened. "They're moving something. Could be kids." Jessica followed his gaze and frowned. "We can't wait. If they're about to make a delivery..." A crackling voice came through the radio, interrupting her. "SWAT en route. ETA 3 minutes." Daniel exhaled sharply, his mind racing. "We don't have 3 minutes. If we wait, we could lose them." Jessica hesitated, her instincts warring with protocol. Finally, she nodded. "We move now." They slipped through a gap in the fence, keeping to the shadows as they made their way toward the loading dock. The guards were distracted, their backs turned as they chatted near the entrance. Daniel crept up behind them, his footsteps silent on the concrete. He moved quickly, grabbing one guard and slamming him against the wall before he could react. The man struggled briefly, but Daniel overpowered him, twisting his arm behind his back and cuffing him. Jessica handled the second guard with equal precision, delivering a swift strike to his temple that left him unconscious on the ground. She quickly secured him with zip ties, then turned to Daniel. "Clear." They moved toward the loading dock, where the worker was still stacking crates. He looked up, startled, but Daniel raised his gun and shook his head. "Don't even think about it." The man froze, his hands raised in surrender. I don't know anything." "Then this will be easy," Jessica said, stepping forward. "Where's Kane?" The man's eyes darted nervously between them. "I don't know. He's not here. I just work the deliveries." Daniel pressed the barrel of his gun against the man's chest. "Where do the deliveries go?" The worker swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "The trucks take them to different drop-off points. I don't know the exact locations. Please, I'm just a driver." Jessica exchanged a glance with Daniel. The worker wasn't their priority. They needed to search the building and find any evidence tying Kane directly to the operation. Daniel gestured toward the crates. "Open them." The man hesitated, but the fear in his eyes was enough to make him comply. He pried open one of the wooden crates, revealing rows of stuffed animals. The man hesitated, but the fear in his eyes was enough to make him comply. He pried open one of the wooden crates, revealing rows of stuffed animals and toys packed neatly inside. Daniel's heart sank. "It's a cover," Jessica murmured. "They hide the kids beneath the cargo." Daniel's grip tightened on his gun. "Keep going." The worker opened another crate, and this time Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Beneath the layer of toys was a small mattress, barely large enough for a child to lie on. He could see the imprint of a body on the fabric, along with a small, discarded shoe. Daniel's blood boiled. "Where are they?" he demanded, his voice rising. I don't know," the worker stammered, his hands shaking. "They move them through the tunnels beneath the warehouse, but only Kane knows where they go after that." Jessica's radio crackled. "SWAT has arrived, moving in." Daniel exhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. "Secure the area," he told Jessica. "I'm going after Kane." "Wait!" Jessica grabbed his arm. "You don't even know if he's here." Daniel's eyes burned with determination. "If he's not, then I'll find someone who does." Without waiting for her response, he sprinted toward the main entrance, his gun drawn. The halls inside were dimly lit and smelled of oil and damp concrete. He moved quickly, checking each room as he passed, but they were all empty. Then he heard it, a faint noise, like the creak of a door opening. He followed the sound down a narrow corridor, his footsteps echoing softly. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar, and light spilled out onto the floor. Daniel pushed it open with the barrel of his gun and stepped inside. The room was small, filled with filing cabinets and a desk covered in papers. A man stood by the window, his back turned to Daniel as he packed a briefcase. He was older than Daniel had expected, with graying hair and an air of sophistication. "Mr. Kane," Daniel said, his voice steady. The man froze for a moment, then slowly turned around. His expression was calm, almost bored, as if he'd been expecting this. "You've been busy, Officer Reed." Daniel took a step forward, his gun trained on Kane's chest. "It's over. We have everything we need to put you away for the rest of your life." Kane smiled faintly. "Do you really think it's that simple?" Before Daniel could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Jessica burst into the room, her gun raised. "We've secured the building," she said. "No sign of the kids." Daniel's grip tightened on his weapon. "Where are they, Kane?" Kane's smile widened. "You're too late." But Daniel didn't believe him. Not this time. Daniel Reed's hand trembled slightly as he tightened his grip on the gun, the weight of Kane's smirk fueling his anger. The dim room felt suffocating, the air heavy with tension as the man who had orchestrated years of disappearances stood mere feet away, acting as if he had already won. Jessica Parker stepped cautiously toward Kane, her gun steady. "The building is surrounded, SWAT's sweeping the perimeter as we speak. You're not walking out of here, so drop the act and tell us where the kids are." Kane chuckled softly, as if the question amused him. "You think I'm just going to hand you everything? You have no idea how deep this goes. Arresting me won't change anything." Daniel felt a surge of frustration. "Try me." Kane leaned back against the desk, his hands casually resting on either side of him. "You've already seen how this works, Officer Reed. For every child you rescue, there are more being moved across state lines, through ports, across borders. I'm not the end of the line. I'm just a piece of the puzzle." "You're the piece we've got right now," Jessica said, her voice sharp. "And that's enough to tear your world apart." Kane's eyes flickered toward her for a moment before settling back on Daniel. "You really think you're the hero here? You pulled over a car by chance, and now you think you've unraveled something bigger than you can handle." He smirked. "The people I work for don't play by your rules." Daniel stepped closer, his blood boiling. "And what about the rules you play by, Kane? Taking kids from their families, treating them like cargo, ruining lives. How do you justify that?" For the first time, Kane's smug demeanor wavered, replaced by a cold, detached look. "I don't justify it," he said flatly. "I make money. That's the only rule that matters." Daniel's stomach churned. He had dealt with criminals before, but something about Kane's complete lack of remorse made his skin crawl. "You're going to tell us where they are," he said through clenched teeth. "Or you're going to spend the rest of your life rotting in prison." Kane shrugged. "I've already made arrangements. By the time you figure out where they've been moved, they'll be long gone." Jessica's radio crackled, and a voice came through. "SWAT secured the tunnel entrance. No sign of the kids yet. But we're sweeping the entire underground section." Daniel's pulse quickened. The tunnels, they were close. If SWAT could find them before Kane's men relocated the children, they still had a chance. Jessica caught his eye, reading his thoughts. "We're not giving up," she said firmly. "We'll find them." Kane chuckled again, shaking his head as if they were naive. "I respect the determination, I really do. But you're chasing ghosts." Daniel had heard enough. He lunged forward, grabbing Kane by the collar and slamming him against the wall. His voice was low and deadly. "Listen to me, you piece of garbage. I'm not leaving this building without those kids. If you think I won't tear this place apart brick by brick to find them, you're dead wrong." Kane's eyes narrowed, but a flicker of something, fear, appeared for the briefest second. "Fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're in the lower levels. There's a service elevator at the end of the east wing. But you won't reach them in time." Daniel released him, breathing heavily. "We'll see about that." Jessica was already on the radio, relaying the information to SWAT. "East wing, lower levels, service elevator," she repeated, her voice urgent. "We need units there now." Kane's smirk returned as he straightened his shirt. "Even if you find them, do you think this ends with me? Someone will take my place. There's always someone else willing to do the dirty work." Daniel ignored him, his focus solely on the task ahead. "Stay here," he told Jessica. "Make sure he doesn't go anywhere." Jessica nodded, her gun still trained on Kane. "Be careful." The hallway leading to the east wing was dimly lit and lined with peeling paint and rusted pipes. Daniel moved quickly, his footsteps echoing off the walls. The adrenaline pumping through his veins drowned out everything else. His exhaustion, his fear, even the sound of his own breathing. He reached the end of the corridor and spotted the elevator Kane had described. The doors were old and dented, but the panels still glowed faintly, indicating it was operational. Without hesitation, he pressed the button and waited, his gun raised and ready for anything. The doors creaked open, revealing an empty elevator car. He stepped inside, pressing the button for the lower level. As the doors closed, he clenched his jaw, bracing himself for whatever lay ahead. The elevator descended slowly, the hum of the machinery vibrating beneath his feet. Daniel's mind raced, picturing the worst, children locked in cages, terrified and crying, waiting for someone to save them. The elevator jolted to a stop and the doors slid open to reveal a dimly lit basement. The air was damp and cold, and the smell of mildew mixed with something far more unsettling, fear. Daniel stepped out, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Rows of metal doors lined the walls, each one locked and bolted. His heart pounded as he moved from door to door, shining his light through the small grated windows. Then, he saw them. A group of children huddled together in one of the rooms, their small faces pale and tear-streaked. Their eyes widened when they saw the beam of light, and Daniel's throat tightened. He banged on the door, his voice breaking. "It's okay, I'm here to get you out." The sound of approaching footsteps made him spin around, gun raised. A man emerged from the shadows, but before he could react, Daniel fired a warning shot into the ground. "Drop it," Daniel shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. The man hesitated, then dropped the crowbar he was holding and raised his hands. Daniel kept his gun trained on him as he grabbed the radio. "I've found them. Lower level, southeast corridor. Get me backup and medical support now." The radio crackled with confirmation, and Daniel exhaled shakily. The children inside the room stared at him, their eyes wide with hope. "It's over," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "We've got you." The sound of sirens blared in the distance as SWAT flooded the building, their footsteps thundering down the stairs. Jessica arrived moments later, breathless but relieved. She looked at the children, then at Daniel. "We did it," she said softly. But Daniel didn't feel relief, at least, not yet. They had found the kids, but Kane's network wasn't finished. There were more out there, more children waiting to be saved. Still, as the children were led to safety and Cain was taken into custody, Daniel allowed himself a moment to breathe. This wasn't the end, but it was a victory. And for now, that was enough. The soft hum of the ambulance faded into the distance, leaving the cold dawn air heavy with silence outside the warehouse. Daniel Reed stood on the cracked pavement, watching as the last of the rescued children were loaded into emergency vehicles. The scene around him was controlled chaos, officers directing traffic, SWAT members debriefing, and medical personnel treating the children. Jessica Parker walked up beside him. Her arms crossed and her face etched with exhaustion. "They're safe," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "That's what matters." Daniel nodded, but the knot in his chest didn't loosen. The kids they had saved were just a small fraction of the victims. Cain's network extended far beyond this warehouse. And even though they had taken him down, Daniel knew the fight was far from over. He rubbed a hand over his face, the adrenaline finally wearing off and leaving him drained. "Did Cain talk?" Jessica shook her head. "Not yet. He's still clinging to the idea that we can't touch the rest of his operation." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we make him talk." Back at the precinct, the interrogation room was as sterile and cold as ever, but the air inside felt heavier with Cain sitting smugly at the table, his hands cuffed in front of him. His demeanor hadn't changed. He still exuded the confidence of a man who thought he couldn't be beaten. Daniel entered the room with Jessica close behind. He placed a stack of papers and photos on the table in front of Cain and sat down, his gaze never leaving the man's face. "You've already lost," Daniel said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "We have the kids, we have the documents from Langley. We've got enough evidence to bury you." Cain leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk curling at the corners of his mouth. "You think you've won because you shut down one warehouse? You have no idea how many layers there are to this." Daniel ignored the bait. He slid a photo across the table, a picture of one of the rescued children. A little girl with tear-streaked cheeks and messy blonde hair. Her name is Megan. She's 7. She was supposed to be on her way to school yesterday morning, but instead, she was locked in a crate in your warehouse. Cain's expression didn't falter. Jessica leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "You can sit there and act like this doesn't bother you, but we're not leaving until you give us names. The people you answer to, the locations they use, everything." Cain chuckled softly. "Even if I did tell you, it wouldn't make a difference. You take down one link, and another one will pop up. That's how this works." "Not this time," Daniel said, his voice low and steady. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Cain's. "You're going to give us what we need because you know what happens if you don't. We've frozen your accounts, seized your assets, and dismantled your main operation. By the time we're done, there won't be a single place left for you to hide." Cain's smirk faltered. Just for a second, and Daniel saw the crack in his armor. Jessica seized the moment. "Do you really think the people you work for are going to protect you now? They'll leave you to rot in prison, just like they did with Blake. And trust me, we'll make sure you end up in general population where everyone knows exactly who you are." Cain's jaw tightened. "You wouldn't dare." "Try us," Daniel said. The room fell silent, the weight of their words hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Cain shifted in his seat, his confidence eroding with every passing second. Finally, he exhaled sharply and leaned forward. "There's a man in Miami," he said reluctantly. "He's the one who handles the overseas routes. Name's Victor Santoro. If you want to trace the kids who've already been taken out of the country, you'll need him." Daniel's heart pounded, but he kept his expression neutral. "Where do we find him?" Cain hesitated, then gave them an address. Jessica jotted it down quickly, her eyes blazing with determination. "If you're lying—" "I'm not," Cain interrupted. "Santoro doesn't like being tracked. If he finds out you're coming, he'll disappear." Daniel stood, sliding the photos back into the folder. "Then we'll make sure he doesn't see us coming." Back in the precinct hallway, Jessica caught up to Daniel as they made their way toward the operations room. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" Daniel didn't slow down. "Kane knows we've got him cornered. If he's lying, he knows we'll be back to make his life miserable." Jessica nodded, but her brow remained furrowed. If Santoro's the next link, this could lead us straight to the overseas network. "That's the plan," Daniel said. "We shut down the supply chain and the whole thing collapses." Inside the operations room, the team was already assembling. Maps were pinned to the walls, and agents were reviewing files from Langley's safe. The air buzzed with energy. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. He walked up to the lead agent coordinating the mission. "We need to mobilize a team to Miami, fast." The agent nodded. "I've already got a unit on standby. We'll hit Santoro's location within the next 24 hours. Daniel's grip on the folder tightened. "Good, because if we don't catch him now, we might not get another chance." Jessica placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. "We're going to get them," she said softly. "All of them." Daniel met her gaze and saw the same fire burning in her eyes, the same drive that had kept them going since the night he pulled over that car. He nodded, the knot in his chest loosening just a little. They weren't finished yet, but for the first time it felt like they were finally one step ahead. The humid Miami air clung to Daniel Reed's skin as he stepped off the plane and onto the tarmac, the morning sun already blazing overhead. The city stretched out before him, a glittering mix of beaches, high-rise buildings, and winding back streets that held secrets most people would never see. But Daniel wasn't here for the beaches or the scenery. He was here to find Victor Santoro, the next link in Kane's operation, and possibly the man who could help them dismantle it for good. Jessica Parker stood beside him, her sunglasses shielding her eyes from the bright sun. She adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder and checked her phone. The task force set up a temporary base at a local precinct. They've already started monitoring Santoro's known associates. Daniel nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Any sign of him yet?" "Not yet," Jessica replied, scrolling through her messages. "But they confirmed he's still in the city. He owns a small yacht and a couple of high-end cars. If he tries to run, we'll know." Daniel exhaled slowly. They couldn't afford to let Santoro slip away. Kane's network was like a house of cards. One wrong move and the whole thing could collapse before they had the chance to take it down. "We can't give him time to disappear," Daniel said, his voice firm. "Let's get to the base and start tracking him." The precinct in Miami was a stark contrast to the one back in Clearview. The hum of activity was constant, with officers weaving in and out of rooms, phones ringing, and the clatter of keyboards filling the air. Daniel and Jessica were ushered into a makeshift operations room, where maps of the city were pinned to the walls alongside photos of Victor Santoro and his known associates. The lead officer, Detective Marcos Rivera, greeted them with a firm handshake. He was a stocky man in his mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and a sharp gaze that seemed to take in everything at once. "Glad you could make it," Rivera said, gesturing for them to sit at the long table. "We've been tracking Santoro for a while, but he's slippery. Moves around a lot, uses burner phones, and keeps his meetings private." Jessica placed her bag on the table and pulled out Langley's folder. "We have reason to believe he's involved in trafficking routes connected to Kane's operation. If we can get him to talk, we'll have a shot at taking down the entire network." Rivera nodded. "We've got eyes on his known locations. He owns a club downtown called Viento, but he rarely shows up in person. We're also monitoring his yacht, which is docked at a private marina." Daniel studied the map pinned to the wall, tracing the locations with his finger. If he's not at the club or the marina, where does he conduct business? Rivera pointed to a photo of a high-rise apartment building overlooking the bay. "This is his safe spot, private penthouse, 24-hour security. We haven't been able to get a warrant to search it yet, but if he's hiding anything, it's probably there." Jessica tapped her pen against the table. "If we can get eyes on him, we won't need a warrant. We'll catch him in the act." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "What's his routine? Does he have any predictable patterns?" Rivera pulled up a surveillance report on his laptop. "He's a creature of habit. Usually spends his mornings at a cafe in Little Havana. then checks in with his associates throughout the day. If he's planning a deal, he'll make contact within the next 24 hours. Daniel exchanged a glance with Jessica. They were close, closer than they had been with any other lead. But they needed to move fast. "Let's split up," Daniel suggested. "I'll head to the cafe and see if he shows up. Jessica, you stay here and coordinate with the team monitoring his other locations. If he makes a move, we'll be ready." Jessica nodded. "Be careful. Santoro's not the type to go down without a fight." The cafe in Little Havana was a small, bustling spot with colorful tiles lining the walls and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. Locals gathered around wooden tables, chatting in rapid Spanish and sipping espresso as the morning sun streamed through the windows. Daniel sat near the entrance, his back to the wall and his eyes scanning the room. He sipped from a cup of black coffee, the bitterness grounding him as he kept watch for any sign of Santoro. He didn't have to wait long. The bell above the door chimed, and a man in a tailored suit walked in, his presence commanding immediate attention. Victor Santoro was exactly as described, clean-cut, polished, and radiating an air of power. He greeted the barista with a nod and ordered a coffee before taking a seat by the window. Daniel's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to Jessica. "Target is here. Moving in." Santoro's phone buzzed on the table, and he picked it up, his expression darkening as he read the message. His eyes darted around the room and Daniel's breath hitched. Had Santoro already been tipped off? Suddenly, Santoro stood and slipped out the back door, his coffee untouched. Daniel cursed under his breath and followed, weaving through the tables and pushing the door open just in time to see Santoro rounding the corner of an alleyway. His instincts kicked in and he sprinted after him, his boots pounding against the pavement. "Stop!" Daniel shouted, but Santoro didn't slow down. The alley twisted and turned, the walls narrowing as Daniel closed the distance between them. He reached out, grabbing the back of Santoro's jacket and yanking him to the ground. They tumbled onto the asphalt and Santoro struggled, throwing an elbow that connected with Daniel's ribs. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Daniel pinned him down and twisted his arms behind his back. "It's over, Santoro," he growled, pulling out his handcuffs. Santoro spat out a curse in Spanish, but he stopped struggling as the cuffs clicked into place. Breathing heavily, Daniel pulled out his phone and called Jessica. "I've got him." "Where are you?" she asked, her voice filled with urgency. "Behind the cafe. Send a unit to pick him up." "On it," Jessica replied. Santoro glared up at Daniel, his chest heaving. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into," he said, his voice laced with venom. Daniel leaned in, his face inches from Santoro's. "Actually, I do, and you're going to tell me everything you know about Kane's overseas roots." The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, drawing closer with each passing second. Daniel tightened his grip on Santoro's arm, refusing to let go. This was the break they needed. And Daniel wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. Victor Santoro sat in the interrogation room, his cuffed hands resting on the cold metal table. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting shadows that danced across his sharp, angular face. He leaned back in the chair, his eyes half closed as if the situation bored him. But Daniel Reed wasn't fooled. Beneath the surface, Santoro was calculating, looking for an angle to play, a way to buy time. Jessica Parker stood near the door, her arms crossed as she observed Santoro with the same intensity Daniel had come to rely on. She knew when to stay quiet, when to push, and when to let Daniel take the lead. Right now, they both knew this was his moment. Daniel sat across from Santoro, the folder of evidence from Langley's safe spread out on the table between them. Photos of children, transaction histories, offshore bank accounts. It was all there. Enough to put Santoro away for life if he didn't cooperate. Daniel tapped the folder lightly with his fingers. "You've built a nice little empire, haven't you?" he said, his tone calm but laced with steel. "Money laundering, trafficking, smuggling. You've got your hands in everything." Santoro smirked, his gaze sliding lazily over the folder. "I run a business." "Detective, that's not a crime." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Santoro's. "This isn't a business. It's a death sentence for the kids you move through your system." He slid a photo of one of the rescued children across the table. "She's 8 years old. You're telling me that's just business?" For the first time, flicker of discomfort crossed Santoro's face, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual mask of indifference. Jessica took a step forward, her voice sharp. "You think Kane's going to save you? He didn't save Blake. He won't save you either. You're nothing but another expendable piece of his puzzle." Santoro laughed softly. "Kane and I aren't the same. Blake was a liability, I'm not." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then prove it. Give us Kane's overseas routes, the contacts you've been working with, and the drop-off points. If you help us shut this down, maybe we can talk to the DA about cutting you a deal." Santoro raised an eyebrow. As if considering the offer, he drummed his fingers on the table, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And if I don't?" Daniel didn't blink. "Then you rot in prison, and I make sure every inmate knows exactly who you are and what you've done." The room fell silent, the weight of Daniel's words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Santoro's fingers stopped drumming, and he exhaled slowly, as if resigning himself to the inevitable. "There's a shipment scheduled to leave tomorrow night," Santoro said, his voice low but steady. "A container ship docked at Port Everglades. It's heading to Morocco. There are kids on board, at least a dozen." Jessica's breath hitched, but she quickly masked her reaction. "Who's handling the shipment?" Santoro shrugged. "A local crew Kane hired. They're small-time, but they know how to stay off the radar. The ship's captain doesn't ask questions as long as he gets paid." Daniel jotted down the details, his mind racing. "What about Kane? What? Is he connected to the shipment directly?" Santoro hesitated, then nodded. "He oversees everything from a distance. He's careful, but he monitors the key operations. If you stop this shipment, you'll be cutting off one of his main supply chains." Daniel's gaze hardened. "And where is Kane now?" Santoro smirked again, but this time it was tinged with bitterness. "If I knew that, I wouldn't be sitting here. He keeps his location a secret. Only a few people know where he is at any given time, and I'm not one of them." Jessica placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, signaling that they had enough for now. She nodded toward the door, and Daniel followed her out of the room, leaving Santoro to stew in his own thoughts. In the hallway, Jessica exhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around the folder in her hands. "We need to move fast. If that ship leaves port, those kids are gone." Daniel nodded, already pulling out his phone to call Rivera. "Get the task force ready. We're hitting Port Everglades tonight." Rivera's voice crackled through the phone. "We'll be ready. What about backup?" "We'll need a tactical unit to secure the ship and sweep for hidden compartments," Daniel replied. "If Kane's crew tries to fight back, we need to be prepared." As he ended the call, Jessica leaned against the wall, her brow furrowed. "Do you think Santoro's holding anything back?" "Probably," Daniel admitted. "But right now, this is our best shot. If we can intercept the shipment, we can cut off Kane's supply chain and maybe force him to come out of hiding." Jessica nodded. "Let's make sure we're ready for anything." The sun was setting by the time Daniel and Jessica arrived at Port Everglades. The docks stretched out in all directions, lined with towering shipping containers and massive cranes silhouetted against the orange sky. The air smelled of salt water and diesel fuel, and the distant hum of machinery added to the tension simmering beneath the surface. SWAT units were already in position, their black tactical gear blending into the shadows. Rivera approached Daniel and Jessica, his expression grim. "The ship's scheduled to depart in 2 hours. We've got eyes on the crew, but no sign of the kids yet." Daniel scanned the docks, his gaze narrowing as he spotted a group of men loading crates onto the ship. "They're hiding them somewhere on board. We need to move before they seal the containers." Rivera nodded and signaled to his team. "We go in quiet. If they spot us too early, they might try to hide or harm the kids." Daniel's heart pounded as they moved into position, sticking to the shadows and using the stacks of containers as cover. The ship loomed ahead, its massive hull reflecting the fading sunlight. Jessica tapped his shoulder and pointed to a side entrance near the loading dock. That's our way in. With weapons drawn, they slipped through the entrance and onto the ship. The narrow corridors were dimly lit, and the sound of their footsteps echoed softly off the metal walls. Daniel's grip on his gun tightened as they made their way deeper into the ship, checking each room they passed. Then, they heard it, a faint whimper coming from behind a locked door. Daniel motioned for Jessica to cover him as he tried the handle. Locked. Without hesitation, he kicked the door in, the force of the impact splintering the frame. Inside, a group of children huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. Jessica quickly holstered her weapon and knelt beside them. "You're safe now," she said gently. "We're going to get you out of here." Daniel spoke into his radio. "We found them. Lower deck, starboard side. Send backup to secure the area." The radio crackled with confirmation, and within moments, SWAT officers flooded the ship, detaining the crew and sweeping for any hidden compartments. As the children were led off the ship, Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him. But it was short-lived. Kane was still out there, and until they found him, the network wouldn't be completely dismantled. Jessica stood beside him, her expression a mix of triumph and determination. "This is a win," she said softly. "But we're not done." Daniel nodded, his jaw set. "Not until Kane is behind bars." The Miami night was restless, filled with the distant hum of traffic, the occasional blare of a car horn, and the rhythmic crash of waves against the harbor. But for Daniel Reed, none of it registered. He sat on a bench overlooking the docks, his hands clasped tightly in front of him as he replayed the events of the night over and over in his mind. They had saved the kids. They had arrested Santoro. They had shut down the shipment before it could leave port. By all accounts, it was a victory, but to Daniel it felt like a temporary reprieve. Kane was still out there, pulling strings from the shadows, and as long as he remained free, the cycle would continue. Jessica Parker sat down beside him, the warmth of her presence grounding him slightly. She handed him a bottle of water and took a sip from her own before breaking the silence. "I know that look," she said softly. Daniel glanced at her. "What look?" "The one that says you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." He let out a dry laugh. "Maybe I am." Jessica leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "We did everything right tonight. We saved those kids, Daniel. That's not something to take lightly." "I know," he replied, his gaze fixed on the dark water. "But it's not enough. Kane's still out there, and every second we don't have him is another second he's planning his next move." Jessica nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Santoro gave us the overseas routes, the contacts, the logistics. It's only a matter of time before we use that information to find Kane." "Time," Daniel muttered. "That's the problem. He's always one step ahead." Jessica fell silent, and for a moment the only sound between them was the distant cry of a seagull. Then her phone buzzed, and she pulled it from her pocket, her brow furrowing as she read the message. "It's Rivera," she said. "He's got something." Daniel stood immediately, the exhaustion in his bones forgotten. "Let's go." Back at the precinct, Detective Marcos Rivera met them in the operations room. A map of international shipping routes spread across the table. His fingers traced a red line that stretched from Port Everglades to multiple locations overseas: Morocco, Turkey, Southeast Asia. "We cross-checked the routes Santoro gave us with recent shipments," Rivera explained. "There's one shipment that caught our attention. It left from a small private dock upstate 2 days ago, and it's heading to a port in Malta." Jessica frowned. "What's so special about this shipment?" Rivera tapped the folder in front of him. "The manifest lists it as construction equipment, but the company listed as the sender doesn't exist. It's a front, just like the others." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Who's overseeing the shipment on the receiving end?" Rivera flipped through the pages until he found what he was looking for. "A man named Yusuf Marwan. He's known for smuggling weapons, drugs, and, most recently, people. Interpol's been after him for years, but he's always managed to slip through their fingers." Jessica crossed her arms. "And you think Kane's working with him?" More than that, Rivera replied. Marwan's the one who handles the overseas distribution. If we intercept the shipment in Malta, we might be able to trace the entire operation back to Kane. Daniel's mind raced. Can we get Interpol involved? Rivera nodded. I've already contacted them. They're willing to cooperate, but we'll need to move fast. The ship is scheduled to dock in Malta in 3 days. Jessica glanced at Daniel. This could be it. If we take down Marwan, Kane's network will be crippled. Daniel didn't hesitate. Then we're going to Malta. The flight to Malta was long and tense, the hum of the engines doing little to ease Daniel's nerves. He stared out the window as the plane crossed the Atlantic, the darkness outside reflecting the storm brewing inside him. Jessica sat beside him, flipping through the pages of the file on Marwan. You've been quiet again, she said without looking up. Daniel sighed. I'm trying to figure out Kane's endgame. He's always been careful, always stayed one step ahead. Why would he risk working with someone like Marwan, who's been on Interpol's radar for years? Jessica considered this for a moment. Maybe Kane's getting desperate. We've taken out key parts of his operation, Langley, Santoro, the shipments. He could be scrambling to keep everything from falling apart. Or, Daniel said darkly, he's setting a trap. Jessica closed the folder and turned to face him. If this is a trap, we're ready for it. We've come too far to back down now. Daniel nodded, but the knot in his chest didn't loosen. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something they didn't fully understand. When they landed in Malta, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the island's ancient buildings and narrow streets. The air was warm and salty, and the sound of waves crashing against the harbor was a stark contrast to the tension humming through Daniel's veins. They were met at the airport by Inspector Luca Moretti, a seasoned Interpol agent with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He wasted no time briefing them as they drove toward the port. The ship is scheduled to dock in 48 hours, Moretti explained. We've got plainclothes officers monitoring the port, but Marwan has a reputation for spotting surveillance. We can't afford to tip him off. Jessica studied the map Moretti handed her. Where do you think he'll make the exchange? There's a warehouse near the port, Moretti replied. It's isolated, easy to secure, and he's used it before for smuggling operations. If Kane's involved, this is where it'll happen. Daniel's grip tightened on the handle of the door. We need to get inside that warehouse before the ship arrives. Moretti nodded. We've arranged for a covert entry tonight. If we can find evidence linking Marwan to Kane, we'll have everything we need to shut this down. As they neared the port, Daniel felt the weight of the moment settle over him. They were closer than ever to bringing Kane down, but the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. We've got one shot at this, Jessica said. As if reading his thoughts, Daniel nodded, his gaze hard. Then we make it count. The warm Maltese night wrapped around Daniel Reed like a suffocating blanket as he crouched behind a row of shipping containers, the distant hum of the sea crashing against the docks. The warehouse loomed ahead, its silhouette barely visible in the dim glow of the overhead lamps scattered along the port. The salty breeze did little to cool the sweat dripping down his neck, but Daniel's focus was razor sharp. Jessica Parker was beside him, her breathing steady as she scanned the area with her binoculars. Guards at the entrance, she whispered. 2 of them, armed. Daniel nodded, his hand resting on the gun holstered at his side. Did Moretti's team disable the security cameras? Jessica pressed her earpiece and listened for a second before nodding. Cameras are down. We're clear to move. Behind them, Inspector Luca Moretti signaled to his team of Interpol agents. They were dressed in black tactical gear, blending into the shadows as they prepared to breach the warehouse. Daniel and Jessica would be going in first, undercover as dock workers, to get a sense of what they were up against before the full team moved in. You ready for this? Jessica asked, her voice steady but soft. Daniel glanced at her, a mixture of determination and apprehension in his eyes. I don't think we've ever been ready for any of this. But we've come too far to back out now. Jessica smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said she understood the weight he was carrying. Then let's finish it. They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled against the concrete as they approached the warehouse. The guards at the entrance barely gave them a second glance, assuming they were part of the crew unloading cargo from the nearby ships. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, but his outward appearance remained calm and composed. The inside of the warehouse was vast, with towering stacks of wooden crates and shipping containers creating a maze of narrow pathways. The air smelled of salt, oil, and something faintly metallic like rusted machinery. Overhead lights buzzed softly, casting flickering shadows that danced across the concrete floor. Daniel and Jessica stuck to the perimeter, their eyes darting from shadow to shadow as they navigated the space. They passed several workers loading crates onto forklifts, but none of them seemed to notice the newcomers. "Where would Marwan be?" Daniel whispered. Jessica scanned the area, her eyes narrowing as she spotted a set of metal stairs leading to an office overlooking the warehouse floor. "Up there. He'll want a vantage point to oversee the operation." They made their way toward the stairs, weaving between crates and forklifts. The sound of machinery masked their footsteps, but Daniel's pulse quickened with every step. The sense of being watched prickled at the back of his neck, but he forced himself to stay focused. As they climbed the stairs, Jessica drew her gun, her body tense and ready for anything. Daniel followed suit, his senses on high alert. When they reached the top, Jessica tried the door handle. Locked. Daniel crouched and pulled out a lock-picking tool from his pocket. The mechanism clicked softly as he worked, and within seconds, the door creaked open. They slipped inside, closing it quietly behind them. The office was small but cluttered, with stacks of papers and shipping manifests covering the desk. A large map of the Mediterranean was pinned to the wall, red lines connecting various ports in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Jessica moved to the desk, flipping through the papers with practiced precision. "This is it," she whispered, her eyes scanning the documents. Shipment schedules, payment records, even coded messages between Marwan and Kane. Daniel grabbed his phone and started taking pictures of everything. "This is the evidence we need to tie Kane directly to the trafficking routes." Jessica held up a manifest. "Look at this. There's another shipment scheduled to leave tomorrow night. Destination, Istanbul." Daniel's stomach churned. More kids. Jessica nodded grimly. "If we don't stop this, they'll disappear again." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside the office. Daniel and Jessica exchanged a quick glance. Their movements synchronized as they pressed against the wall on either side of the door. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped just outside. The door handle jiggled. Jessica raised her gun, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Daniel's breath slowed, his mind calculating their options. The door creaked open, and a man stepped inside, a guard, judging by the radio clipped to his belt. He barely had time to react before Jessica struck, slamming the butt of her gun against his temple. The man crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Daniel quickly dragged him into the corner and secured his hands with zip ties. "Let's get out of here before someone notices he's missing." Jessica grabbed the documents from the desk and stuffed them into her bag. Moretti's team should be in position by now. They slipped back down the stairs, keeping to the shadows as they made their way toward the exit. The warehouse seemed quieter now, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable chaos to erupt. As they reached the main floor, Daniel's radio crackled softly. "This is Moretti. We're ready to breach on your signal." Daniel scanned the area one last time, his eyes locking onto a group of workers loading crates into a shipping container marked for Istanbul. His blood boiled at the thought of what or who might be hidden inside. He pressed the button on his radio. "Go." The sound of boots pounding against concrete filled the air as Moretti's team stormed the warehouse, their voices shouting commands in both English and Maltese. Workers scattered in every direction, some raising their hands in surrender while others tried to flee. Gunfire erupted near the loading dock, and Daniel's heart raced as he followed Jessica toward the chaos. He spotted Moretti tackling one of the guards to the ground while another officer pried open the shipping container. The sight inside made Daniel's blood run cold. A group of children, huddled together and trembling, stared back at them with wide, fearful eyes. Their small bodies were bruised, their clothes torn and dirty. One of the younger girls clung to a stuffed animal, her tears silently soaking its fur. Daniel's chest tightened, and he forced himself to stay focused. "Get them out of here," he ordered, his voice shaking slightly. Moretti nodded, directing his team to escort the children to safety. Jessica stood beside him, her breath uneven. "We've got them," she whispered, "but Kane's still out there." Daniel's jaw clenched. Not for long. As the warehouse was secured and the last of the crew was taken into custody, Daniel's phone buzzed with a new message. He glanced at the screen, his heart skipping a beat as he read the words, "Kane spotted. Confirming location. Stand by for details." Daniel looked at Jessica, the fire in his eyes reigniting. "They found him." Jessica nodded, her expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "Then let's finish this." The dark streets of Tangier, Morocco, stretched out before Daniel Reed, like a maze of secrets waiting to be uncovered. The city hummed with life even at midnight, vendors pushing carts of roasted chestnuts, the rhythmic clatter of footsteps on cobblestone, and the distant hum of motorbikes weaving through narrow alleys. But for Daniel, the world beyond the glowing GPS screen in their car barely registered. Jessica Parker sat in the passenger seat, her phone pressed to her ear. The glow of street lamps flickered against her determined expression as she confirmed the latest intel. "We've got confirmation," she said, lowering the phone and turning to Daniel. "Kane's inside a villa just past the Medina. He's been hiding there for at least 48 hours. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter. The final piece of the puzzle was within reach, and his pulse thumped like a war drum. "Any sign of security?" Jessica scrolled through the message on her phone. "Interpol's surveillance says he's got armed guards patrolling the perimeter, but it's not a fortress. If we move fast, we can get to him before he escapes again." Daniel nodded, steering the car down a narrow street that twisted like a serpent. His mind raced with every possibility, what Kane might do, whether this was a trap, and if they were truly prepared to face him. But none of it mattered anymore. The chase that had begun with a frightened girl in the back seat of a car was coming to an end. "Moretti's team is in position," Jessica continued, glancing out the window as they neared their destination. "They're covering the exits so Kane won't be able to slip away." "Good," Daniel said, parking the car in a shadowed alley. The villa stood just a few blocks away, its white walls partially hidden by overgrown trees. The soft glow of lanterns flickered in the courtyard, casting dancing shadows along the tiled walkway. Daniel and Jessica stepped out of the car, moving quickly and quietly through the narrow streets. The weight of his gun against his hip felt heavier than usual, and Daniel's heartbeat seemed to echo off the ancient walls surrounding them. "You ready for this?" Jessica asked as they ducked behind a low wall that bordered the villa's garden. Daniel met her gaze. "We didn't come this far to fail." She nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line of determination. "Let's end it." The garden was lush and overgrown, with vines creeping along stone columns and the scent of jasmine hanging heavy in the air. They moved cautiously through the shadows, their footsteps silent against the soft earth. A guard passed by, his rifle slung lazily over his shoulder, but he didn't notice them. Jessica raised her hand, signaling for Daniel to hold position as she slipped behind the guard. In one swift motion, she grabbed him from behind, pressing her arm against his throat and cutting off his air supply until he slumped unconscious to the ground. Daniel dragged the body behind a cluster of bushes, ensuring it was hidden from view. He looked up at the villa, its windows glowing faintly from the lights inside. "Where's Kane?" he whispered. Jessica checked the map on her phone. "The main living room, second floor. That's where Moretti's team last spotted him." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Let's go." They entered through a side door, the wooden frame creaking slightly as Daniel eased it open. Inside, the air was cooler, and the scent of incense mingled with the faint aroma of leather furniture. The faint murmur of voices drifted from somewhere upstairs, and Daniel's pulse quickened. Jessica gestured for him to follow as they crept up the grand staircase, the intricate tilework underfoot muffling their steps. The voices grew louder as they approached a partially open door at the end of the hallway. Daniel could make out Kane's familiar voice, calm, measured, as if he weren't a man being hunted by international law enforcement. Jessica leaned in, her ear pressed to the door. "He's on the phone," she whispered. Daniel nodded and raised his gun. "On my count." Jessica drew her weapon and positioned herself on the opposite side of the door. Daniel silently counted down with his fingers, 3, 2, 1, then kicked the door open, bursting into the room with his gun raised. "Don't move," he shouted, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. Kane stood near a grand mahogany desk, a phone clutched in his hand. His eyes widened briefly, but then the smirk returned, the same smug expression Daniel had come to loathe. He slowly lowered the phone and placed it on the desk, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Well, well," Kane said, his voice as smooth as silk. "I have to admit I didn't expect you to make it this far." "Shut up," Daniel growled, taking a step forward. "You're done." Kane chuckled softly, as if the situation amused him. "You think arresting me is going to stop this operation? I've built something that doesn't rely on one person. Cut me down and someone else will take my place." Jessica circled around him, her gun trained on his chest. "We'll deal with them next," she said coldly. "But tonight, it's your turn." Kane's gaze shifted between them, his eyes calculating. "You're making a mistake," he said. "I'm the only one who can tell you where the rest of the kids are. If you arrest me now, you'll lose your only chance to save them." Daniel's grip on his gun tightened. "We already saved dozens of them," he said, his voice hard. "And the ones we haven't found yet? We'll find them without you." Kane's smirk faltered for the first time. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who you are," Daniel snapped. "A coward who hides behind others and profits off their pain. But tonight, you're not hiding anymore." The door behind them burst open as Moretti and his team entered, their weapons raised. Kane's shoulders sagged slightly, the realization of his defeat finally sinking in. Moretti approached, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "It's over, Kane." Kane didn't resist as Moretti secured the cuffs around his wrists, but his eyes remained locked on Daniel. "You think you've won?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel stepped closer, his gaze cold. "No, but we've made sure you've lost." Outside the villa, the night air was thick with the scent of salt and jasmine. As the Interpol agents loaded Kane into a waiting vehicle, Daniel and Jessica stood side by side, watching the scene unfold. Jessica exhaled softly, her breath fogging in the cool night air. "We did it." Daniel nodded, the weight on his chest finally beginning to lift. "Yeah, we did." But even as Kane was driven away, Daniel knew their work wasn't done. There were still pieces of the network to dismantle, still children to find and bring home. But tonight, they had taken down the man who had built it all. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel allowed himself to believe that they were on the verge of something bigger. Jessica placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. "Let's go home, Daniel." He looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Home sounds good." And as they walked away from the villa, the weight of the chase slowly began to fade, replaced by the hope of what came next. The jet hummed softly as it soared through the night sky, the stars scattered like distant fireflies across the endless darkness. Daniel Reed leaned his head against the window, watching the faint lights of the Mediterranean disappear beneath a blanket of clouds. His body ached, every muscle begging for rest, but his mind was far too restless to give in. Jessica Parker sat across from him, her eyes closed, but Daniel knew she wasn't asleep. She held her phone loosely in her hand. The screen dimmed as if waiting for the next message or update. "You should try to get some sleep," Jessica murmured, opening one eye to glance at him. Daniel let out a small chuckle. "I was about to tell you the same thing." Jessica smirked and sat up straighter, stretching her arms. "I'll sleep when this is over." Daniel nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Although they had captured Kane, the operation was far from over. There were still children missing, and Kane's network, while weakened, wasn't completely dismantled yet. Moretti's team is already interrogating him, Jessica said, scrolling through the latest update on her phone. He's being transferred to a high-security facility tomorrow, but so far he's sticking to his story. Says he's just a piece and that taking him down won't stop the others. Daniel exhaled through his nose, the frustration simmering just beneath the surface. Of course he's sticking to that story. It's his way of keeping us chasing shadows. Jessica leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. But he's wrong. We've got the documents, the shipping manifests, and Santoro's testimony. We've already shut down several of their routes. It's only a matter of time before the rest of it crumbles. Daniel rubbed his eyes, the weight of the past few weeks catching up to him. It's just hard to feel like we've won, when we know there are still kids out there waiting to be found. Jessica placed a hand on his knee, her touch warm and reassuring. We'll find them, one step at a time. They landed back in the US at dawn, the sun casting a soft golden hue over the airport tarmac. Daniel and Jessica didn't waste time. As soon as they cleared customs, they were back at the precinct, where a small task force was already reviewing the evidence they had brought back from Malta. Detective Marcos Rivera greeted them with a tired smile. "Welcome back," he said, handing Daniel a cup of coffee. "I hear you caught the big fish." Daniel nodded, taking a sip of the bitter liquid. "We caught him, but we're not done." Rivera gestured toward the evidence board on the wall, which was covered in photos, maps, and lists of names. "We've been cross-referencing everything from the raid on the warehouse. Turns out Kane was running more than just a trafficking ring. He had his hands in illegal arms deals and counterfeit goods too. The man was a walking crime syndicate." Jessica scanned the board, her eyes narrowing as she spotted a photo of Santoro. "What about the kids? Any new leads on the ones we haven't found yet?" Rivera pulled out a folder and handed it to her. "We tracked one of the missing kids to a safe house in Mexico. Local authorities raided it yesterday, and they're processing the scene now. No sign of the child yet, but they found evidence that the safe house was used as a holding area." Jessica sighed, flipping through the photos of the raid. "It's a start." Daniel leaned over the table, tracing his finger along one of the maps. "What about Kane's financial records? Have we identified any more shell companies or hidden accounts?" Rivera nodded. "We're working on it. The money trail is complicated. Offshore accounts, cryptocurrency, you name it. But Langley's files gave us a decent starting point." Jessica placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We're making progress. It's slow, but we're getting there." Daniel knew she was right, but the weight of the children they hadn't found yet sat heavily on his chest. "I just don't want to miss anything. We've seen how fast these operations can disappear if we don't move quickly." Rivera's phone buzzed, and he answered it with a curt nod. "Yeah, got it. We're on our way." He hung up and looked at Daniel and Jessica. That was the warden at the detention facility where Kane's being held. He requested a meeting. Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Why would Kane want to meet with us?" Rivera shrugged. "He didn't say, but it's probably worth hearing him out." Daniel's instincts kicked into overdrive. Kane never did anything without a reason, and if he was asking for a meeting, it meant he had something to gain. "Let's go." The detention facility was stark and sterile, its concrete walls and fluorescent lighting creating an oppressive atmosphere. Daniel and Jessica were led through a series of security checkpoints before being escorted into a small visitation room. Kane sat at the metal table, his wrists shackled and his smirk firmly in place. "Detectives," he greeted them, his voice as smooth as ever. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Daniel pulled out a chair and sat across from him, his gaze cold. "You asked for us. What do you want?" Kane chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "I wanted to offer you a deal." Jessica scoffed. "You're not exactly in a position to make deals." "Oh, but I am," Kane replied smoothly. "You see, I have information you need. The locations of the remaining kids, the identities of the people who took my place while you were busy chasing me down." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And what do you want in return?" Kane's smile widened. "A reduced sentence. Witness protection. A new identity once this is over. If you give me that, I'll give you everything." Jessica's eyes narrowed. How do we know you're not bluffing? Kane leaned forward, his gaze locking onto hers. You don't. But are you willing to take that risk? The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily between them. Daniel's mind raced. Kane was a liar, a manipulator, but if he really did have the information they needed, they couldn't afford to ignore it. Jessica glanced at Daniel, her expression unreadable. What do you think? Daniel's fingers drummed lightly against the table. He hated the idea of giving Kane anything. But the faces of the missing children flashed through his mind, each one a reminder of why they had started this mission in the first place. He exhaled slowly, meeting Kane's gaze. We'll consider it, he said. But if you're lying, no deal will save you. Kane smirked, leaning back in his chair. I guess you'll just have to trust me. As they left the room, Jessica fell into step beside Daniel, her brow furrowed. You really think he's telling the truth? I don't trust him, Daniel admitted. But if there's even a chance he knows where those kids are, we can't ignore it. Jessica nodded, her eyes filled with the same determination that had carried them this far. Then let's get to work. And as they walked out of the detention facility, Daniel felt the weight shift slightly. The end of the hunt was near, but whether it would end in victory or tragedy was still unknown. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city as Daniel Reed and Jessica Parker sat in the conference room, their eyes fixed on the large screen displaying rows of data. Kane's deal had set the precinct buzzing, with officers scrambling to verify the locations and contacts he had provided. The air was thick with tension, as if everyone in the room was holding their breath, waiting to see if Kane's information would lead them to the missing children, or if it was just another trap. Detective Marcos Rivera leaned over the table, tapping a highlighted section on the screen. This is the first site Kane gave us, a property registered under one of his shell companies in El Paso, Texas. It's listed as a storage facility, but local authorities say no goods have passed through there in over a year. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Could be a holding location before the kids are moved across the border. Jessica nodded, her fingers flying across her laptop as she pulled up satellite images of the area. There's a lot of empty land surrounding it. If they wanted to keep a low profile, it'd be the perfect spot. Rivera crossed his arms. We've got a tactical team on standby, but we need confirmation before we move in. Kane's known for laying traps. Daniel leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. That's why we need eyes on the ground. Send in a surveillance team. If they spot anything suspicious, we'll go in. Rivera nodded and made the call. As he stepped out of the room, Jessica turned to Daniel, her brow furrowed. If this lead is real, it could be our chance to bring the rest of the kids home. I know, Daniel replied, but his voice was heavy with doubt. But if it's not, Kane's just bought himself more time. Jessica leaned forward, resting her hand on his. We've come too far to let him outplay us now. We'll verify the site, and if it's real, we'll hit it hard. Daniel exhaled, nodding slowly. We can't afford to miss. The surveillance team arrived at the El Paso location an hour before dawn. The air was cool and still, the vast expanse of desert surrounding the facility cloaked in darkness. From their position on a nearby hill, the team had a clear view of the building, a small, nondescript warehouse with a chain-link fence surrounding the property. Daniel listened through his earpiece as the team leader reported in. No visible activity yet. There's a single guard patrolling the perimeter. But he doesn't seem alert. Thermal imaging shows movement inside. Could be multiple people. Jessica adjusted the volume on her radio. Can you get a closer look without being spotted? Already on it, the team leader replied. Daniel glanced at Jessica, the tension between them palpable. If they see something that confirms Kane's intel, we move in immediately. A few moments later, the radio crackled again. We've got eyes on several individuals inside. Looks like they're keeping them in a partitioned section of the warehouse. We can't confirm if they're children yet, but there's definitely something going on. Daniel's heart pounded. That's enough. Tell the team to get ready, we're going in. The tactical team arrived swiftly, their black SUVs cutting through the desert like shadows in the pre-dawn light. Daniel and Jessica rode in the lead vehicle, their minds racing with anticipation. As they approached the facility, the headlights switched off, and the vehicles came to a silent stop just outside the fence. The team moved with precision, cutting through the fence and slipping inside without a sound. Daniel's pulse thumped in his ears as they approached the main entrance, his gun drawn and ready. Jessica was right behind him, her eyes sharp and focused. The team leader raised his hand, signaling for them to breach. The door burst open with a deafening crash, and the team flooded inside, their shouts echoing off the concrete walls. "Clear left, clear right." Daniel's eyes scanned the room, his breath coming in short bursts as he navigated through the maze of crates and equipment. Then he heard it, a faint muffled whimper coming from the back of the warehouse. "This way," he called to Jessica, who followed closely as they made their way toward the sound. They reached a partitioned section of the warehouse, where several makeshift rooms had been constructed with plywood and metal sheets. Daniel kicked open the nearest door, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Inside, a group of children huddled together on the floor, their eyes wide with fear. Their clothes were dirty, their faces pale, but they were alive. Daniel's chest tightened, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. Jessica knelt beside the nearest child, her voice gentle. "You're safe now. We're here to take you home." One of the older boys, no more than 10, clung to her arm and whispered, "Are you the police?" Jessica nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Yes, we're here to help," Daniel spoke into his radio. "We've found them. Requesting medical support and transport ASAP." The radio crackled with confirmation, and Daniel exhaled a shaky breath. The children were being led out of the warehouse one by one, but Daniel's mind was already racing ahead. This was only one of the locations Cain had given them. How many more were out there? Jessica touched his arm, grounding him. "We'll find them," she said softly. "One step at a time." Daniel nodded, but the weight on his chest didn't lift. Cain had given them this lead willingly, too willingly, in Daniel's opinion. As the last child was loaded into the waiting ambulance, Rivera approached them, his face etched with concern. "We found something else," he said, holding up a tablet. "Encrypted messages between Cain and someone named the Broker. Whoever this person is, they've been coordinating the movement of the kids across state lines." Jessica's eyes darkened. "Did Cain mention anything about a broker when we spoke to him?" "No," Daniel said, his jaw tightening. "But he must know who it is." Rivera nodded. "We're working on decrypting the messages, but it's going to take time." Daniel looked toward the horizon, where the first rays of sunlight were breaking through the darkness. The rescue was a victory, but the war wasn't over. "Cain won't give us the broker without a fight," he said. "But if we can find this person, we'll finally have everything we need to shut the network down for good." Jessica stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the rising sun. "Then we keep pushing." Daniel exhaled, his resolve hardening, until there's no one left to hide. The interrogation room was cold and dimly lit, the walls closing in like a cage designed to break a man. But Cain, shackled to the metal table, didn't seem broken. If anything, his smirk remained as infuriatingly intact as ever. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly against the tabletop, as if he were the one in control. Daniel Reed and Jessica Parker entered the room together, their postures stiff with tension. Jessica closed the door behind them with a sharp click, while Daniel dropped a folder onto the table, scattering photographs and printed emails across its surface. "Recognize these?" Daniel asked, his voice like steel. He pointed to the images of the children they had rescued in El Paso, each photo paired with the encrypted messages they had found. Cain glanced lazily at the papers before shrugging. "Should I?" Daniel clenched his jaw. "These messages were between you and someone you called the Broker. We decrypted part of the file. The Broker arranged every transfer, every drop-off. You were the middleman, but they're the one running the logistics. So, where do we find them?" Cain smiled, tilting his head like a teacher amused by a student's mistake. "You're assuming I want to tell you." Jessica leaned forward, her palms flat on the table. "Let me make this easy for you," she said, her voice ice cold. You don't give us the broker, you don't get your deal. No reduced sentence, no witness protection. You'll rot in a cell, and trust me, Kane, you won't be safe there." Kane's smile faltered briefly, but he recovered quickly. "You're bluffing. You need me." Daniel's gaze darkened. "Not as much as you think." He pointed to the folder. "We've already tracked down 2 of the broker's safe houses. We know how they move the kids across state lines. It's only a matter of time before we find them without you." Kane's fingers stopped drumming. His mind was working. Daniel could see that much, calculating, weighing his options. But instead of fear, there was something else in his eyes. Amusement. "You think you're close, don't you?" Kane said, chuckling softly. "You think you've got it all figured out." He leaned forward, locking eyes with Daniel. "But there's something you don't know." Jessica tensed. "What don't we know?" Kane's grin widened. "The broker isn't who you think they are. You've been looking for a criminal mastermind, but the truth is much more personal." Daniel's heart thumped, but he kept his voice steady. "What does that mean?" Kane leaned back, savoring the moment. "The broker was never supposed to get involved directly, but they did, because of you." He nodded toward Daniel. "All of this started when you pulled over that car with Emily Cooper in the back seat. The broker panicked. They made mistakes, left trails." Daniel's breath hitched. "Who is it?" Kane's smile turned venomous. "Someone you trusted." Jessica shot Daniel a sharp glance, and he knew she was thinking the same thing. They had trusted a lot of people in this investigation. But if Kane was telling the truth, the betrayal cut deep. "Give me a name," Daniel demanded, his fists clenching. Kane leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Vincent Langley." The room fell silent, the weight of the name hanging in the air like a grenade waiting to explode. Daniel blinked, his mind reeling. "Langley? That's impossible. We already arrested him." Kane chuckled again. "And yet here you are, still chasing ghosts. Langley played you from the start. He cooperated just enough to keep you off his trail while the broker, the real Langley, kept everything running in the background." Jessica stepped back, her hand instinctively reaching for her radio. "We need to confirm this." Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. Langley had seemed like a loose end tied up neatly, a cog in Kane's machine that they had removed early on. But if Kane was right, they had missed the most dangerous piece of all. Kane leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "You thought you'd won, but Langley's been cleaning up the mess while you've been running around in circles. He's probably already making arrangements to disappear." Jessica spoke rapidly into her radio, relaying the new intel to Rivera. Daniel barely heard her. His mind was locked on the image of Langley's smug face when they had arrested him. He had been too cooperative, too willing to hand over information. It hadn't been out of fear. It had been strategy. Jessica finished her call and turned to Daniel, her face pale. Rivera confirmed it. Langley was released on bail yesterday. He's gone. Daniel's blood turned to ice. How the hell did that happen? Jessica shook her head, her voice tight. His lawyers must have pulled strings. He had the resources to make it happen, and we were so focused on Kane that we didn't see it coming. Kane smiled triumphantly. "Now you see. Langley's the real player here, and you've already lost him." Daniel's fists slammed against the table, the sound echoing through the room. He stared down at Kane, his breath ragged. Where would Langley go? Kane shrugged as if the answer didn't matter. "That's for you to figure out, but if I were you, I'd start with the offshore accounts you found in Malta. Langley's been funneling money there for years. If he's smart, and he is, that's where he'll run." Jessica placed a hand on Daniel's arm, grounding him. "We can still catch him," she said firmly, "if we act now." Daniel's mind raced, but there was no time for regret or self-blame. Langley had slipped through their fingers, but he wasn't gone yet. Kane had given them enough to work with. He looked at Jessica, his jaw set. "Get the team ready. We're going after him." As they left the room, Kane's laughter followed them, echoing like a cruel reminder of how close they had come and how much farther they had to go. Jessica matched Daniel's pace as they hurried down the hallway. "We'll find him," she said again, her voice steady. Daniel nodded. But his mind was already 5 steps ahead, tracking every possibility, every lead they could follow. "We have to. Because if they didn't, Langley would disappear for good, and the children they hadn't found yet would be lost forever." The private jet soared over the Atlantic, its engines humming steadily as Daniel Reed stared out the window. The distant horizon painted in soft shades of dawn. But the sunrise didn't bring comfort. His mind was locked on one thing: finding Vincent Langley before he vanished into the shadows forever. Jessica Parker sat across from him, her laptop open as she reviewed the most recent intel from Interpol. The tension between them was palpable, the kind that only comes when you know the end of something monumental is near. "Langley's offshore accounts in Malta have gone quiet," Jessica said, her fingers tapping the keys rapidly. "But Rivera flagged a suspicious transaction made last night, a withdrawal of $2 million from a holding account in the Cayman Islands. The money was transferred to a private bank in Zurich." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Zurich. He's setting up a new escape route." Jessica nodded. "If he's following his usual pattern, he'll lay low in Zurich for a few days while he launders the money through different accounts. It's his last step before disappearing for good." Daniel clenched his jaw. "Then we have to catch him before he finishes that step." Jessica closed her laptop and met his gaze. "Interpol has agents waiting for us at the airport. They've tracked down a villa just outside the city where Langley could be hiding. It's owned by one of his shell companies, and he's used it before." Daniel leaned back in his seat, his mind already formulating a plan. "We hit the villa hard. No time for subtlety. If he's there, we take him down before he has a chance to run." Jessica's hand brushed against his briefly, a gesture of solidarity. "We've come this far. We're not losing him now." Zurich was cold, the crisp morning air biting at Daniel's face as he and Jessica stepped off the plane and into a waiting black SUV driven by an Interpol agent. The city's pristine streets and snow-dusted rooftops passed by in a blur as they made their way toward the villa, located on a secluded hillside overlooking the lake. The lead Interpol agent, Inspector Fabian Keller, briefed them on the way. "Langley's known for keeping a low profile, but we've got surveillance on the villa. No signs of activity yet, but we can't take any chances. He's dangerous when cornered." Daniel's grip on his gun tightened. "We're not giving him an inch. If he tries to run, we'll be ready." Jessica, seated beside him, checked her weapon and nodded in agreement. "We've come too far to let him slip away now." The SUV pulled to a stop at the base of the hillside, where a team of agents in tactical gear was already assembled. Daniel stepped out, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots grounding him in the moment. He took a deep breath, focusing on the task ahead. Inspector Keller approached, handing him a pair of binoculars. "The villa is heavily secured, electric gates, cameras, motion detectors. We've disabled the cameras, but once we're inside, we'll need to move fast." Daniel scanned the villa through the binoculars. The modern structure was sleek and cold, its glass windows reflecting the early morning light. But beneath its luxury facade lay the man who had orchestrated one of the most sinister operations Daniel had ever encountered. "Let's move," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The team approached the villa silently, their movements precise and practiced. Jessica and Daniel took the lead, their weapons raised as they cleared the path to the main entrance. A lock-picking tool made quick work of the door. And they slipped inside, the cold air giving way to the warmth of polished wood floors and high ceilings. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made Daniel's instincts flare. He signaled for the team to split up and search the villa room by room. Jessica stayed by his side, her eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. A creak echoed from the second floor, faint but unmistakable. Daniel pointed toward the staircase, and they ascended carefully, their steps muffled by the thick carpet. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched before them, lined with closed doors. The creak came again, this time from the end of the hall. Daniel and Jessica moved quickly, their guns trained on the door. Daniel's heart pounded as he counted down silently. 3, 2, 1. Then kicked the door open. Langley was inside, frantically packing a briefcase full of cash and passports. His head snapped up at the sound of the door crashing open. And for the first time, Daniel saw fear flash across his face. "Drop it, Langley!" Daniel shouted, his gun aimed directly at him. Langley hesitated for a fraction of a second, then lunged for the gun hidden beneath the desk. But Daniel was faster. He fired a single shot, striking the gun out of Langley's hand and sending it skidding across the floor. Langley clutched his hand, blood dripping onto the floor as he stumbled back against the wall. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed through gritted teeth. Jessica stepped forward, her gun still raised. "We know exactly what we're doing. You're done, Langley." Langley's eyes darted between them, desperation seeping into his voice. "If you arrest me, you'll never find the rest of the kids. I'm the only one who knows where they are." Daniel's grip tightened on his weapon. "We've heard that before. Kane tried the same trick." "I'm not Kane," Langley spat. "You take me in and the others will vanish. You'll be chasing ghosts again." Jessica stepped closer, her gaze cold. "Then start talking. Where are they?" Langley hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. He glanced at the briefcase as if weighing his options. But when he saw the determination in Daniel's eyes, he exhaled shakily. "There's a cargo plane scheduled to leave from a private airstrip outside the city tonight. It's carrying 6 of them. If you hurry, you can intercept it." Jessica relayed the information to Keller over the radio, her voice steady but urgent. "We need a team at the airstrip now." Daniel stepped closer to Langley, his voice low. "And after that plane, where's the rest of your network?" Langley smirked weakly, blood staining his teeth. "You'll never shut it all down. There are always more people willing to take the risk for the right price." Daniel's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Maybe, but you won't be one of them." The sound of sirens filled the air as Langley was led out of the villa in handcuffs, his briefcase confiscated as evidence. Daniel and Jessica stood outside, watching as the team secured the perimeter. "We've got a chance to save them," Jessica said softly, her breath visible in the cold air. "This time, we're one step ahead." Daniel nodded, the weight on his chest finally starting to lift. "It's not over, but it's the closest we've come." Jessica placed a hand on his arm, grounding him. "We did it, Daniel. We found him. We stopped him." As they watched the convoy of vehicles disappear down the road, Daniel allowed himself a moment to breathe. The faces of the children they had saved flashed through his mind, along with the ones they still needed to find. But for the first time, hope outweighed the fear. They had won this battle, and they weren't done fighting. "Come on," Jessica said, her voice warm. "Let's go bring them home."